And Mike, we need to talk. Figure out some things.
Of course, boss.
Figure out what?
The plan.
The beauty of Red Dead Redemption 2, and honestly any game people point to as having great storytelling, is the freedom of perception. The game doesn't spoon-feed you answers. It doesn't stop to explain every thought a character has or spell out exactly what you're supposed to take away from a particular moment. Instead, the developers step back. They loosen the reins. They trust the player to experience the story and decide for themselves what it all means. So, when did Dutch lose his mind? Some say it happened before the game even begins, rooted in Blackwater. The killing of Heidi McCord is often pointed as the moment everything went wrong. For some, that's when it all fell apart, while for others, it's when Dutch's mask didn't crack but slipped entirely, because that cruelty, that selfishness was always there to begin with. And then there's Micah. What role does he play in Dutch's collapse and growing recklessness? It's undeniable that he makes things worse. That part isn't up for debate, but that's not the real question. The real question that should be asked with Micah is, was Micah simply the one enabling and confidently supporting Dutch's worst qualities? Or is he the one introducing Dutch to a more selfish way of thinking? Something that just so happened to run much deeper than even Micah fully understood. And that itself is where it all became dangerous, because that new line of thinking, or believing that it was okay to think a particular way, just so happened to coincide apocalyptically with everything that was happening to the Vanderlyn gang, the collapse, all of Dutch's plans going to hell, nowhere appearing to be safe, and everybody's, up until that point, universal, undeniable trust and loyalty within Dutch now becoming genuinely questionable. And then what about John and Arthur? When did their faith in Dutch start to fade? Why? Were there signs long before we as players ever noticed them? Were there signs that even the characters themselves noticed but chose not to? Look any deeper or give it a second thought? What repercussions came from the chosen ignorance? Things happened in the background, moments we, or even they, didn't fully register until it was already far too late. Over the last year, or I guess technically years now, I've tried to tackle these questions in a lot of different ways. Micro level, macro, far-reaching. In this past year, I started breaking it all down chapter by chapter, and that's something that's going to continue into the next year, from Saint Denis all the way to the game's closing, because Red Dead Redemption 2 for me is like a book that you come back to at different points in your life, and affects you differently depending on when you experience it. There are moments I completely missed on earlier playthroughs. Hell, there are still cutscenes and open world events I'm seeing for the first time even now, after 2,000 plus hours into this game. And there are moments that felt one way when you're moving through the story in real time, but look completely different when you step back and look at the wider arc. One video I did earlier this year is the clearest example of that. In the mission American Distillation, I highlight how, upon revealing his plans to Arthur very subtly in front of Sheriff Gray, there's a lot of moments where Dutch drops facial gestures and expressions to highlight just how he really feels about the Southerners. He looked down upon them. He miscalculated them, and because of that, he sabotaged the gang's ability to play the Grays and Braithwaites the way they should have been able to. His own prejudices towards them narrowed their options in the long run and ultimately caused them to be the ones that were ultimately played. And the entire region suffered greatly because of it. With this compilation, and that's exactly what this video is, we're taking a look at Arthur from the opening moments of the game all the way through the conclusion of Clemens Point. From the man who began as Dutch's most feared and loyal enforcer, doing whatever it took to make sure the gang came first, carrying out Dutch's will without a moment of second thought, to someone more measured, more logical. This is where Arthur starts becoming the big brother to John, making sure he's alright, keeping him grounded in the aftermath of Jack's kidnapping. It's where Arthur's concern for Sadie grows alongside his trust and respect for her, recognizing both the danger she carries and the strength she's becoming. These 3 chapters lay the groundwork for the final Arthur video I released this year, the one centered on redemption, on the question of whether a single good act can mean something, even when it comes from a man who spent his entire life living by the creed of an outlaw. What's important to note is that these chapters come before Arthur is ever forced to face his own mortality, which brings the idea of perception back into focus. This is only half of Arthur's journey. It predates Dutch's head injury, Sadie's explosive rage, the deaths of Hosea and Lenny, Dutch's growing paranoia and suspicion, and that absence of Hosea's moral compass. And yet, even with this first half, I believe there's more than enough here to highlight the mentality of Arthur and the gang as a whole, the good, the bad, and the dutiful, and provides enough context to meaningfully approach the idea of Arthur's redemption. This marks the conclusion of Red Dead on the channel for 2025. In 2026, we'll tackle the other half of this story, and if you'd like to support the channel directly through behind-the-scenes content or extra material on what exactly is coming up for the channel, both for Red Dead and all the other IPs that have made an appearance on the channel since the beginning of 2025, my Patreon's linked below. If not, just watching is more than enough, and I genuinely want to thank you for it. This has been an amazing year. Happy New Year to all of you, and here's to a great 2026.
The whole world's changing. Even I see that now. Our time is pretty much past. They don't want folk like us no more. It's their rules and be damned with you. No more outlaws. No more killers. Now it's us being hunted. Oh, they ain't stopping. We went and made our choices a long time ago, so I guess we gotta pay for our sins.
Oh, Arthur. What a sad world we live in.
Oh, I ain't sad, Mary Beth. Just realistic about what's coming.
This is part 2 of covering Arthur Morgan's journey and character evolution of Red Dead Redemption 2. Now, if you want to start at the beginning, covering the chapters of Coulter and Horseshoe Overlook, it will be pinned down in the comment section below, where you can easily find it. But today we're going to be continuing that journey, focusing our attention on Chapter 3, the gang's time at Clemens Point. Clemens Point is a very subtle but powerful chapter when it comes to Arthur's relationships with other gang members. Now, some are more obvious and easily take their own spotlight, such as his time with Hosea inside the Bar of Rhodes, intentionally causing a ruckus for the Grays on behalf of the Braithwaites.
In this here bar, in this here town, are entirely free. The only rule is that you gotta drink them.
That mission easily highlights the love, admiration, and successful relationship he has with his adopted father, Hosea. Most of the gang's operations tied to the Braithwaites are ran by the man that Arthur refers to with quite a level of affection as a master con artist within his journal. Then we have his time with Lenny, increasing the level of respect and bond he has with the young outlaw after acting on a tip he had, which paid off quite well for the gang. It resulted in the successful acquisition of rifles for the moment, but later turned out to be quite an effective reconnaissance mission for the gang's next hideout in light of the Pinkertons cracking down on them. Then there's the moments that aroused our suspicions, such as Arthur being kidnapped during a meeting between Colm and Dutch, with neither Micah nor Dutch curious on where he was after not showing up to their agreed rendezvous point after the meeting. Then there's the overall versatility and inner dynamics within the gang. Uncle being forced to ride out with the enforcers to lend a hand on a tip he had, only for it to turn out to be owned by Leviticus Cornwall, the very person that pushed them this far southeast. Bill defending himself for being seen as nothing more than the local idiot.
That wasn't my fault. It was just one of them things.
How come every time I get in trouble, I'm called a fool and an idiot? But when you get in trouble, oh, it's just one of them things.
Then there's Dutch's relationship with his brother Hosea and Arthur. And finally, the gang's combined retribution on a target for taking one of their own. Arthur's growing frustration with Strauss's moneylending victims is also an element. However, a major component that we cannot let get lost on us is Arthur's level of reflection that immediately begins here within this chapter. And that doesn't end with him, but extends to his younger brother, John. It's by no means a coincidence. Horseshoe Overlook ends with John and Arthur's personal frustrations with each other finally laid out into the open. John had a bone to pick with Arthur for taking Jack out on a fishing trip, possibly hitting a sensitive spot in his acknowledgement on not doing right by his son or Abigail, while Arthur had his own resolved problems. The brother he grew up with, the one who Dutch took in and taught that the gang comes first before anything else, made the ultimate decision of selfishness and betrayal. He decided to leave, and that created a tense feeling of resentment by Arthur on a sibling level. Never mind the code. Despite Arthur's attempts to hide his feelings behind that very thing, the fact he continued to hold it against John while everyone else, including Dutch, has seemed to forgive him betrays a lack of a strict adherence to the code they are raised on and nothing else. In that same mission, they finally get to voice their issues with one another, one in particular being a long time coming. The resentment still takes a background due to a more pressing and immediate issue. Leviticus Cornwall tracking the gang down and essentially revealing the Pinkertons now have his financial backing. The resulting bloodshed that ensued in the town of Valentine, and the gang's forced relocation echoed the days of the impromptu retreat into Coulter, save for their losses. They were still headed into what is for them uncharted territory, and the immediate need to lose the law. The weight of Arthur and John's relationship doesn't end with Horseshoe Overlook though, it actually bleeds into the beginning of Clemens Point, and it rears its importance in a seemingly offhand comment between Arthur and Charles when they're scouting for the gang's next hideout following Horseshoe Overlook. I've pointed out in a handful of videos before Arthur's initial refusal to help the German family save their father from bandits, how he had no personal issues with effectively condemning the terrified lone mother and her 2 children to death by sending them on their way, because he was interested more in their real estate for the rest of the Vanderlyn gang. Arthur and Charles, of course, end up saving the family's father and finding the next location that'll turn out to be their hideout in Clemens Point, thanks to Charles's intervention. Chastising Arthur for being so cold-blooded and falsely claiming his refusal to help was rooted in the logic of the gang's inability to even help themselves, let alone other people. The interaction would turn into a profound occurrence that Arthur would later recall in his journal, lamenting at his instinct to think and weigh out his options before doing the right thing, as opposed to openly sharing his admiration for Charles, who's just wired to naturally do the right thing. After that profound moment that would stick with Arthur, he and Charles begin to track down the family's missing father, during which Charles brings up John, who decided it was a good idea for him to discreetly head back into Valentine to collect the money from the sheep he and Arthur sold. This triggers Arthur to not only share with Charles his unresolved resentment towards his brother, possibly even feeling a little ashamed on account of his specific wording of quote-unquote guessing he still hasn't forgiven him for up and leaving for a year.
He reckoned he'd be able to slip in and out.
Oh, well, if it's John's idea, it must be a good one.
What is it with you and him?
He disappeared on us for a while. When Jack was real young, a long while. A year or more.
He did?
And we was family, you know? Guess I still ain't fully forgiven him for that.
And it's that mentality, how Arthur's mentality ultimately begins this chapter, a far cry of how he would act and feel towards himself, towards Dutch, the gang's predicament, and most of all John, who by the chapter's climax would be the most vocal challenger of Dutch's plans, of Dutch's next move, of Dutch's ability to get them out successfully. And ironically, it's John's vocal doubt of Dutch and the event that triggers it that ultimately brings him and Arthur closer.
Bounty hunters, Pinkertons, lawmen. Everywhere we go, more and more civilization. Perhaps this is it from now on. We shall see, I guess.
I think it's best to begin with the circumstances of the gang and Arthur's unique position here within its hierarchy. Because if the gang members aren't looking to Dutch or Hosea for reassurance or insights into what exactly is going on or the gang's overall next move, then Arthur's typically the one that finds himself putting many of their worries at ease. And there were many worries. At least whispers of such, with the most prominent of which infecting Hosea and Lenny. While Hosea might have alluded to doubting Dutch and doubting the success of the promises Dutch is making to everyone, Clemens Point begins with Hosea and Lenny discussing their doubts and worries.
Do you worry that maybe we've lost our way?
How do you mean? Ignore that. I won't pretend ignorance. I know just what you mean.
Now begins with Hosea's first instinct to question Lenny's words, but he almost immediately walks it back, admitting he feels very much the same. Even so, he tries to reassure both himself and Lenny, reminding them that they've survived worse. An argument everyone from Arthur to John to Dutch clings to in order to suppress their doubts, fears, and the creeping sense of doom. But in this moment, Hosea is unwavering about two things. First, he refuses to buy into Dutch's empty talk of redemption. They all have done terrible things, and in the end, they're all doomed. Second, no matter what fate has in store, they will go down fighting. Lenny can be sure of that. As the conversation winds down, Hosea turns to Arthur asking for his thoughts. Arthur's response is blunt. To put it simply, he says killing is more his style, he doesn't think. And in that one line, Arthur's mindset is laid bare for the chapter's beginning. I'll get more into that in just a moment, but first, I want to focus on Dutch. I don't believe Dutch would have ever come to the South on his own volition, even if relocation for the gang meant acquiring the breathing room the Vandalin gang needed from the people hunting them. If he had options, anywhere but here may have been the better move for him on account of his own personal disdain for Southerners. The gang's actions in Clemens Point throughout the entire chapter is fueled by a mixture of excitement at the thought of gold, personal hatred towards Southerners on Dutch's part, and the idea of taking advantage of a seemingly backwards part of the country stuck in a perpetual feud between two families that was much too easy to ignore. Of course, none of that was part of the gang's original plans until reconnaissance was done, which is fair. That does make sense. However, what I want to point out is the quick switch up in Dutch's mentality, in Dutch's own positioning from this morning to how he was when he was leaving Rhodes. Now, every camp relocation the gang had made, from Coulter to Beaver Hollow, had all been reactionary. They were always on the run, forced to relocate whenever the heat from the law, their own actions, or a mixture of both became too much. But Clemens Point's beginning stands out as an example of just how plans often seem to fall right into Dutch's lap. That morning, right after Arthur sat to hear Hosea and Lenny sharing their doubts, he walks right over to Dutch, who's on the banks of the lake overlooking the water. Dutch makes it clear he is set out with no grand schemes for the day. His intent was just to relax, step back, and collect himself while enjoying a fishing trip with Arthur and Hosea. While the trio are riding out of camp, he does begin to talk of plans, of things that are cooking, but there's nothing set concretely. Whenever Arthur or Hosea begin to levy any type of genuine questions or concerns regarding Dutch's plans, he deflects. He just wants to focus on the fishing for the day. Another innocuous request, seeing how everything the gang has endured before ending up down here. Yet by the time they left Rhodes, just a short time later, Dutch carried a renewed sense of purpose, driven by the possibilities unfolding before him. He immediately gave Hosea instructions to look into the Braithwaites and Arthur to go looking into any further leads or valuable information around the Gray's family estate. In that moment, everybody, from Arthur, Hosea, Dutch, and even ourselves, gets swept up into the instant curiosity of the locals. Despite Trelawney warning of bounty hunters looking for him, Dutch's excitement of what he can do here becomes infectious. Finally, not just he had a plan, but everyone in camp had a task to begin working on. Lay low around the town of Rhodes and learn whatever they could about these warring families and the supposed rumor of rebel gold. It's all natural progression, but Dutch's focus on a fishing trip to then sending Arthur and Hosea to learn more about these families, giving us a chance to bypass the fishing trip altogether and immediately get to work, is quite coincidental when you begin to theorize a little bit. But can you really consider it theorizing when you throw in Dutch's infamous reassurance of thinking he is going to be okay after finding out about rebel gold while ingratiating himself with people he already had a low view on?
I think we're gonna be okay. I know. Well, I always know. Whenever I got you two by my side, things are gonna be just fine.
This sense of excitement and relief that he is going to be okay has always been an interesting moment many people highlight when pointing out Dutch's own selfishness, thinking about himself and his survival over everyone else's. If we were to pay attention to the nuances within his expression, something Rockstar adds a lot of weight to throughout this game, Dutch's correction of supposedly meaning we instead of he could be possible he was just openly venting on how he finally had a plan together, a path to move forward that served as his compass on the what and the how of their next move. Or it could very well have been his selfishness of just looking out for himself. Whatever the case, it's yet another extension of Dutch's growing narcissism, which only becomes more pronounced as the story unfolds. As for Arthur, he effortlessly falls back into the role of the dutiful son, Dutch's loyal enforcer, rarely questioning his father figure's intentions in any meaningful way. If you take the time to observe the exchange between Lenny and Hosea, it serves as a powerful reminder that when doubt begins to creep in, whether about themselves or Dutch, most members of the gang turned to one of two people, Hosea or Arthur. In later chapters, expressing such doubts would be seen as outright treachery in Dutch's eyes, an offense he simply would not tolerate. But at this stage, while still frowned upon, these concerns could at least be voiced. And when they were brought to Dutch's attention, he had ways of silencing them. Concrete plans, heartfelt appeals for unity, or reminders of how he had delivered them from worse. Often, it was a combination of all three. But Dutch could only be physically present for so long. As we all know, no amount of charm or reassurance, no matter how strong, can sustain blind faith indefinitely. When left alone to reflect on their journey, their circumstances, and the choices that led them here, reason and doubt inevitably took hold, forcing them to confront their own conclusions. Lenny was already doing just that. At that moment, Hosea deflected to Arthur, who brushed it off as a simple response, thinking wasn't his style, killing was. Not long after, or whenever the player chose to begin the next mission, Dutch, with no grand plans for the day, decided to enjoy a quiet fishing trip. As the trio prepared to leave camp, Dutch, in an affectionate tone, reminded them that before anyone else, it was just the three of them. A moment that subtly reinforces Arthur's standing as not just a senior member of the gang, but as someone who might even belong to an exclusive circle alongside Dutch and Hosea. Yet despite that, neither Hosea nor Arthur took any initiative to question or doubt what they were really doing down here. From within the contents of Arthur's journal to how he questioned Dutch outright about getting involved with the local law enforcement of Rhodes, there is no discrepancy or any further insight into Arthur's feelings. The bottom line was, ingratiating themselves with the local law enforcement of Rhodes to him was outright ridiculous, especially the way Dutch went about it. While Arthur was dealing with Sadie and Pearson nearly killing each other back in camp, and then heading over to Caliga Hall to learn more information about the Grays, Dutch behind the scenes was getting closer and closer to Sheriff Gray, spinning a lofty tale about himself and his group. This would all culminate in the joke of them becoming deputized because of Dutch effectively working his magic on Sheriff Gray, but the key highlight here is the disconnect of just how far Dutch took this lie upon himself and presented the various Van der Linde gang members in a light that he saw would best suit their purposes. And that becomes pretty clear when Arthur returns to Rhodes, only to find Sheriff Gray, who's clearly drunk, chatting with Dutch and Bill.
Arthur, you've met but not been introduced to Mr. Oh, I'm so sorry, Sheriff Gray.
How are you doing, sir?
I'm fine.
Tough business you boys had.
We did?
Oh, there's no need to pretend with me, sir. Life can be tough.
So it can.
And no man owes another anything.
No, sir.
But still, I feel you were hard done by. Losing your employment like that. But still.
This is at the beginning of the mission American Distillation. By this point, Arthur has already assumed the alias Arthur Callahan, and before you can even speak upon entering the sheriff's office, Dutch is already weaving another layer into whatever lie he's been spinning. He introduces Arthur as a seasoned hunter and killer, seamlessly building on the story he's been feeding Sheriff Gray. When the sheriff casually mentions that Arthur Callahan and his lot had some tough business, something Dutch had apparently already shared with him, Arthur would hesitate, confused, and would glance at Dutch, who subtly winks, signaling him to just play along. Then as Sheriff Gray continues rambling, expressing sympathy for their unfortunate loss of their employment, Arthur returns to Dutch again, his expression filled with silent doubt as if to ask if he was sure about this, if he really knew what the hell he was doing or what the hell he's been telling this man in Arthur's absence. A few minutes later, after Sheriff Gray takes his leave, Arthur turns to Dutch and bluntly tells him how he's lost his mind upon learning that they've been deputized. A joke the entire gang scoffs at, especially Dutch, who sees it as yet another affirmation of his supposed intellectual superiority over what he perceives as a bunch of drunken, inbred southern hillbillies. By the end of the same mission, the Van der Linde gang sees a shipment of moonshine from an illegal Braithwaite operation. This stolen liquor becomes a valuable bargaining chip, setting the stage for the next part of Dutch's plan, which oversees Hosea tasked with introducing the gang to the Braithwaites and handling business with them, while Dutch focused his efforts on the Grays. It's still at this point neither Arthur or Hosea voice any objections, at least not yet. And the reason for it is incredibly simple. Dutch believed the Southerners were ignorant and easy to manipulate. Hosea, on the other hand, usually the more cautious one of the gang's group, became blinded by the promise of gold. And Arthur? Well, he was caught between the gang's desperate need for money to fund their next escape and something far more personal. The thrill of seeing, as he put it, a young Dutch again. The way Dutch spoke after capturing the moonshine reminded Arthur of the man he hadn't heard in a long time. The leader who had always had the answers. The man who always had it all figured out. Regardless of the ridiculous decisions he seemed to be making just earlier in the same day. No matter how ludicrous it was to ingratiate themselves with the local law enforcement to allow Dutch to convince Sheriff Gray to deputize them, or no matter how outlandish of a lie and intricate of a story he's weaving to these Southerners, at least it seemed to be paying off, with Dutch seeming to be somewhat back in control and making the level-headed decision of handing things off to his more cautious and strategic partner, that being Hosea, to gather intel on a family nobody had any meaningful contact with just yet. Can we really blame Arthur for not questioning any of it, especially when the gang already had such a dismissive view of the locals? Arthur doesn't question or challenge Dutch's plan until after meeting Catherine Braithwaite and getting caught in a shootout with the Lemoyne Raiders at the Rhodes Saloon. By that point, his face had already been seen in multiple places, alongside the sheriff, at the Gray family's estate in Caliga Hall, at Braithwaite Manor, and now in a violent bar fight over free illegal moonshine in the heart of Rhodes. Despite his best efforts to begrudgingly play along with the charade Hosea tried to set up, he still had been fully exposed. Now in hindsight, it could be easily seen as a major mistake for Arthur to have personally interacted with both the Grays and the Braithwaites, switching between his alias Arthur Callahan and eventually his real name, Arthur Morgan, depending on the situation and who he was dealing with. But he wasn't the only one. Other gang members had also begun slipping, making their deception increasingly sloppy. But at this stage, it's important to remember it was all still technically in the name of reconnaissance. The shootout at the saloon happened immediately after Arthur first met Catherine Braithwaite alongside Hosea. It was the first time any Vanderlyn gang members interacted with her or cordially spoken to any Braithwaite. The gang still had no concrete proof of any hidden Confederate gold, nor had they fully secured an inroad with the Braithwaites, even though Arthur and Hosea both suspected Catherine Braithwaite of setting them up for the ambush in Rhodes. Hosea still believed they had a chance to regain some leverage. His plan was to return her stolen moonshine in the wake of the firefight in Rhodes, hoping it would earn enough goodwill to uncover real intel about the rumored Confederate gold, or hopefully finding a firm enough alliance with the Braithwaites to develop some kind of solid blueprint to move forward. Dutch, however, was beginning to shift his focus at this point. What started as careful and somewhat increasingly sloppy reconnaissance was rapidly turning into something else. Dutch was no longer interested in playing both families against each other. He was preparing now to rob them both outright. And it was that decision where Arthur first began to have a little bit of pushback, some genuine resistance against his father. Not only did he believe it was a bad idea, but he stood his ground in wake of Dutch's reasoning behind why he wanted to do it. Revenge for his father.
Before they figure out it was us that done it, and not the other lot, we'll be long gone. Think of it as payback for my daddy.
Payback. I ain't in the revenge business, Dutch. Least of all for something happened a long time ago.
Well, I guess we all gotta pay for something.
Dutch's change in plans and reasoning all came immediately after Hosea and Arthur escaped the Lemoyne Raiders and Rhodes. The position they saw themselves and the gang in was not the same as Dutch saw it, which makes all the more sense when, in the same interaction, Dutch reveals to Arthur he sent Javier and John over to the Gray's family estate. Sheriff Gray put in a good word with his father, and Dutch wanted to follow up on it, committing more of the gang's involvement with the Grays and wasting no time executing Dutch's decision to convince both families that they're here to help them, that it's the other family that's robbing them and not the Vanderlyn gang. It's a move Arthur was firmly against. I'd say this is one of the earliest examples of Arthur outright even rejecting Dutch's attempts to calm him down and win him over to his side. To see him straight up push Dutch's hand off him and continue to question if he thought it was genuinely the right move. Really, Arthur was never won over by Dutch's logic, even if it sounded good in theory. This should have been the right time for Dutch to listen to the man who had been present on both sides, for him to gather the information acquired by both Arthur and Hosea from the Braithwaites, and then make a better, much more informed decision on what to do next. Instead, however, from this point forward, all gang operations tied to both families completely ramped up. They would help the Braithwaites burn down the Grays' tobacco fields. The Grays would in turn send them to steal the Braithwaites' prized horses, all while Arthur reflects to the various gang members on the impacts of what they're doing, how they have a lot of irons in the fire, so to speak, and the families may be onto what they're doing. The Lemoyne Raiders showing up in the saloon in the town of Rhodes because of Catherine Braithwaite tipping them off could be completely open to speculation on various factors, and ultimately when boiled down to it, we just don't know. When it came to the gang meeting Tavish Gray, the man who sent them off to steal the Braithwaites' prized thoroughbred horses for the supposed price of $5,000, the price of $5,000 for some horses had Javier, John, and Arthur questioning who in the hell would pay that much for some horses. In the end, they would only get about $700, and their own feeling of how Arthur put it, being a bunch of prized idiots. They left that job feeling played, and I think it was very much a ploy by the Grays, if not to get them killed outright by the Braithwaites, then at the very least to get them to back off with a bloody nose of sorts. I've pointed out in a previous video, Arthur's private meeting with Beau Gray revealed a few key things. The Grays were quite astute, for some seemingly backwards inbreds. Their part of their country, rarely if ever, got new faces, and now a bunch of oddly helpful Yankees appear out of nowhere wanting to just help them out of the kindness of their own hearts. Beau knew the gang was looking for something. Fortunately for them, he cared little about what it was. He was an outcast on account of his affair with Penelope Braithwaite, and as such, she was his only concern. Apart from him sharing what may have been seen by Arthur as an oddly perceptive view from a strange man, Beau also shared with Arthur his family lineage, commenting on how his father was Tavish Gray, and his uncle was none other than Sheriff Lee Gray. That's opposed to Dutch, who referred to as Sheriff Lee Gray as the son of Tavish, and Arthur doing the same thing. Sharing with Tavish, he's been working with his son, the sheriff. Well, it could be just the family revealing the tradition of keeping it within the family, marrying each other off to their cousins, as Beau was set to marry his cousin Matilda, and thus confusing or allowing the various Gray members to introduce themselves or each other as an aunt, uncle, sibling, or spouse. It's a bit more likely that Lee and Tavish intended to set the Vanderlyn gang up. It stands to reason if Beau was able to see the gang, or at least Arthur's dubious intentions, the rest of the Grays wouldn't be too far off from the same conclusions, especially with Arthur being seen in various places and all of a sudden, alleged actions by the Braithwaites are ramped up, as are the Grays. Dutch may have horribly underestimated the sheriff and the family members he interacted with, but so too did Arthur in not picking up what Beau was able to see in just their first interaction together. And if he took him a little more seriously, he could have very well better informed Dutch on his decision to proceed against both families instead of just reminding him revenge was a luxury they couldn't afford and hoping that was enough to persuade his leader from pursuing such a foolish path forward.
No, but nothing. Me and Dutch, and everyone who counts, we know what you do for this gang. We notice. Keep it up. You're gonna start seeing things change for you.
As Arthur followed Dutch's instructions and Hosea's lead with the Grays and Braithwaites, this chapter also marked key moments in his relationships with other gang members. It's not as attention-grabbing, but it is certainly there and does work to set the foundation for moments and actions that prove to be much more profound later. Here in Clemens Point, we see Arthur strengthening bonds, forming new ones, and even mending old wounds. Now, one of the most notable of these was his growing connection with Sadie Adler. For the first time since her husband's death, Sadie began to regain his sense of control, at least to some degree. She was growing increasingly fed up with Pearson's overbearing presence and was no longer content to be treated as helpless. What began as a simple effort by Arthur to take her out of camp for some fresh air, mainly to defuse the situation after she nearly attacked Pearson with a knife, evolved into a mutual respect and understanding between the two of them. Sadie was still finding her place within the gang, and it would be some time before she fully came into her own, but during that first outing with Arthur, she made one thing clear. She could handle herself, even if she came off as a bit of a live wire and was prone to inciting violence. She wasn't about to let anyone, Arthur included, underestimate her. Then there's his time with Charles Smith, the man that inspired Arthur to reflect on his own personal hesitation in doing the right thing. At the beginning of this chapter, or at least leading into it, Charles would prove his loyalty and respect to Arthur by saving his life from some bounty hunters that had him by his throat. Further strengthening their bond and working as a favor, Charles would later call upon in Beaver Hollow when he asked for Arthur's help with the Native Americans as a friend. And then there was Lenny. Like Charles and Sadie, he shares only one mission with Arthur, preaching forgiveness as he went, but in that brief time his role is crucial for the gang and deepens the close relationship he and Arthur have. And the mission would begin with Lenny acting on a tip from former slaves he met in Rhodes. Lenny learned that a group of Lemoyne raiders are running weapons and occasionally sit on a stockpile of cash out in the swamps. He and Arthur would set out to rob them, and the impact of this job cannot be overstated. Their heist delivers more than just money. It arms the gang with brand new rifles and explosives, the very same ones they would later use to blast open the Valentine bank vault when they decide to return for it. More than that, it worked as a valuable reconnaissance mission. When Clemens Point was no longer a viable option for them to stay, the abandoned mansion of Shady Belle would be their next home, the very same one the two of them cleared out together. In the grand scheme of things, this wasn't just another robbery, it was a stepping stone, one that unknowingly set the gang to move quicker when the Pinkertons arrived in the heart of their camp. Of course, that only came to light later. However, in that moment, what I want to highlight with Lenny and Arthur is a seemingly small exchange between him and Arthur on their way back from securing the weapons and explosives. As they make their way back over to Clemens Point, Lenny is relieved the job paid off the way that it did. But he isn't relieved in the sense of glad that it's over. He's relieved simply for the fact of feeling he needed to prove himself as a valuable member, specifically comparing himself to Sean, who he says has been doing a lot for the gang. Lenny, from his perspective, needed this. He needed to prove that he can carry his own weight, that he's just as valuable as every other member, especially the loudmouth, pain in the ass Sean. Arthur would immediately shut this down, not only telling him to focus on himself and what he does, but he would point out a few things with some very important reassurance.
It's good to have something to show like this.
Sean's a loudmouth bragger. Don't worry about what Sean does.
Hey, I like him, you know?
Well, so do I, against my better judgment. Just, you worry about you. He wasn't on Leviticus Cornwall's train with me. We had to dig him out of Blackwater.
But
Nothing. Me and Dutch, and everyone who counts. We know what you do for this gang. We notice. Keep it up. You're gonna start seeing things change for you.
okay then. Okay. Thank you, Arthur.
Reminding Lenny Sean wasn't there on the train with him, and really emphasizing he, Dutch, and everyone else that matters knows how much he does for the gang, just how useful he really is. It's one of the more subtle moments where I'd say Arthur really makes it a point to not necessarily comfort, but at least ease someone's doubts in themselves, which has to mean a lot for someone like Lenny, who is the youngest gang member apart from Jack. Arthur could have just responded sarcastically or talked of how this job went to quell Lenny's doubts, but instead he attacked Lenny's view head on by realistically bringing down this pedestal that Lenny has appeared to put Sean on. Yes, Sean might have been a little more useful in these last few days, but he can't forget that it wasn't Sean but Lenny who hopped on the train alongside him, and it wasn't Lenny who had to be saved from a bunch of bounty hunters, but instead it was Sean. By bringing him down to a more realistic view, reminding Lenny what he has done before in comparison to Sean, and where Sean was at the time. It might seem like a dig at Sean and may appear as if I'm looking too deep into a few small choice of words by Arthur, but everyone reassures and expresses themselves differently. And it's a small touch that's hammered home by Arthur later shaking Lenny's hand and confidently saying he always loves riding with him. This moment serves as both a confidence boost for Lenny and a reminder of Arthur's deep affection for him. Speaking of growing usefulness and mutual respect, Clemens Point offers some of the best companion activities in the game, each one revealing different sides of Arthur's personality and the unique ways he interacts with those around him. While playing dominoes with Tilly, we see Arthur's more gentler, playful side. He's amused by her frustration with Miss Grimshaw, even joking about poisoning her. Meanwhile, Bill, off in the gang's punching bag, continues to be the target of jabs, particularly during an armored wagon robbery that he planned. It was a plan put together on the spot that originally involved Tilly distracting the target, but it all fell apart as she began to tease Bill, calling him by his real name, Marion, and getting under his skin. Then there's one of the most memorable side activities in Arthur joining Sean on a stagecoach robbery, not because he wanted to, but because Sean was dragging Mary Beth along and Arthur refused to let him get her killed. It's one of the best companion moments in the game, showing Arthur's protectiveness over those he cared about. while joking about him not really being worried about Mary Beth after all, but Sean. But for all the excitement, it's the slower moments like the fishing trips that carry the most weight. Take the fishing trip with Kieran, for example. Kieran is a character easily forgotten in the grand scheme of things, captured by Arthur back in Coulter. He was initially held as an O'Driscoll prisoner until the gang set up camp at Horseshoe Overlook, where he was then used as a guide to track down Colm O'Driscoll with the intent of killing him and ending the long-standing feud between their gangs. But of course, Colm wasn't at 6 Point Cabin as they had hoped, and Arthur would have been killed if not for Kieran stepping in and saving his life, a moment that earned him a place in the Vanderlyn gang. Since then, Kieran has mostly kept attending to the horses and fishing for the camp. A quiet existence that leaves him very easy to overlook. But small moments like the fishing trip he has with Arthur serves as a reminder that despite his past, he had carved out a place for himself among them, and Arthur finally acknowledges that for him. Between joking about drowning Kieran for being on O'Driscoll and awkwardly asking if he likes the fishing spot he chose, on account of witnessing a man skinny dipping nearby, Arthur's usual teasing gives way to something more sincere in the end. As they fish, Kieran shares a heartbreaking story about losing his parents to cholera, leaving him orphaned at a young age. It's a painful experience Arthur knows all too well. He too was orphaned at a young age, only saved by the chances of running into Dutch and Hosea, who took him in and taught him everything they knew and raised him into the man he is today. For a brief moment, the teasing stops, and Arthur reminds Kieran that he's not alone anymore.
So who taught you how to fish?
My pappy, mostly. I lost my mammy and pappy when I was young to cholera.
Your mammy?
Like I said, I was real young. After that, I was on my own pretty much, but I knew horses and fishing.
Well, just think now you'll never be alone again.
He has a gang, a family of sorts, back at camp. It's a rare instance of Arthur offering reassurance, yet again, showing that beneath his gruff exterior, there's an understanding and even a quiet sense of compassion. Granted, he's knocked back into teasing Kieran again when Kieran reminds him that it's not that much of a home on account of both Bill and Sadie messing with him and continuing to threaten to kill him. This moment highlights an important aspect of Arthur's character, his willingness to extend an olive branch, even when others in the Vanderlyn gang don't seem to be, and continue to remain wary. Kieran, once closer to being an enemy than a friend, has proven his loyalty and his willingness to pull his own weight. And while many still see him as an outsider, Arthur in his own way offers him a sense of belonging. And Kieran is unique in how he brings out this softer, more introspective side of Arthur, while newer members such as Sadie channel their grief into relentless determination. Kieran's experience is different. He isn't fighting to prove himself through aggression, he's simply trying to find his place within the gang. And in Arthur's quiet acknowledgement of their shared struggles, there's an unspoken understanding there. O'Driscoll or not, they've all been dealt a bad hand. And as the world continues to grow more civilized around them, they become increasingly stranded, clinging to an outlaw way of life that is only becoming more and more unsustainable. While Arthur's fishing trip with Kieran may seem unrelated, it serves as a subtle contrast to the far greater shift in Arthur's relationships, possibly the most important of which being John's. At the start of the chapter, Arthur's feelings towards John are still laced with resentment. Throughout Coulter and Horseshoe Overlook, he never misses an opportunity to remind John of his past selfishness, even going so far as to suggest that maybe things would be easier if he just decided to disappear again. But by the end of Clemens Point, that dynamic has changed. The kidnapping of Jack Marston by the Braithwaites becomes a turning point, not just for the gang, but for Arthur and John's relationship. It serves as a catalyst for several key developments: the gang's collective rage and thirst for vengeance, the depth of Dutch's wrath when he's outmaneuvered, and the fierce unity that binds them all together when one of their own is threatened. In that moment, the gang ceases to be just a band of outlaws. They become a family, focused and unwavering in their pursuit of retribution. The kidnapping of Jack wasn't just an attack, it was a violation of the gang's very sense of security. It wasn't enough for the Braithwaites to cross them, they struck at the heart of their sanctuary, taking the most vulnerable among them. Now, the weight of that offense is deeply felt, fueling the gang's collective rage. But for Arthur, beyond the fury and the need for retribution, something else shifts. His approach to John. Gone is the resentment. The jabs about abandoning his family, the passive encouragement for him to walk away again. In the wake of Jack's abduction, Arthur softens. He begins to ground John, steadying him rather than antagonizing him. He keeps an eye on him, speaks to him with a sense of patience and understanding that wasn't there before. The conversation between Arthur and John as they ride out of Clemens Point to clear Shady Belle perfectly encapsulates this shift in their dynamic. John, for the first time, lays bare his regrets, his faults, and his failures as both a father and a partner.
I treated Jack bad. Abigail, too. I didn't want to believe he was mine. You know, when I was lost on that mountain after Blackwater, part of me thought I could just leave again and no one would ever know.
Come on, it ain't all bad. We've had a rocky run, but we'll be okay. We'll get through it.
Dutch will fix it. Dutch will come up with a big plan. Right now, every plan gets us into worse trouble. We're getting further from where we're meant to be going.
Now, you can't put all this on Dutch. You're worked up, and rightly so. Just don't get too far in your head with all this. You'll never get out.
He admits that he spent years refusing to accept Jack as his son, and now that innocent boy is suffering not because of anything he did, but because of the choices made by those around him. But John's anger isn't just directed at himself. He turns his frustration towards Hosea and Dutch, calling them master con men working their magic, who led the gang into an even worse situation than before. Sean is dead, the Pinkertons found them yet again, and this time they are bold enough to march straight into the heart of their camp. Jack has been kidnapped, and after all of that, there's no gold to show for any of it. He's angry, he's afraid, and he's drowning in guilt. Arthur, however, doesn't meet John's anger with more frustration. He doesn't challenge his grievances against Dutch and Hosea, or tell him how to bury his regret over Jack. Instead, Arthur responds with something John desperately needed: comfort. He reassures him they'll get Jack back, but none of them can help Jack if they're dead or rotting in a cell. He understands John's urgency in wanting to go out and find Jack, but they need to help themselves first. The most important thing that John can personally do right now, though, is breathe, have faith, and above all, stop thinking the way that he is. Because if he doesn't, he'll never recover from it, and in many ways, he never does. John's frustration towards Dutch and Hosea lingers well into the next chapter, and it's where his mentality and perceptions begins to change. The blind loyalty he once had for Dutch begins to crack, and for the first time, his family, Abigail and Jack, start becoming his priority. John makes this new priority clear to Dutch and to everyone else on their way to rob the Saint-Denis Bank. Seemingly for the first time, he openly defies Dutch, putting his family above the gang. Whether Dutch intentionally let John get captured during the robbery as a consequence of this disobedience is something that can be speculated on when we discuss the next chapter in the following video. For now though, Jack's kidnapping stands as a pivotal moment, one that mended Arthur and John's fractured relationship while simultaneously planting the seeds of irreparable damage between John and Dutch.
Some jobs ain't for saving. And some legacies, they are for pissing. You speak as if killing was something I cared about. Your husband knew the rules when he took that money. Now, I'm real sorry about the way things turned out, but he had a choice.
We can't close this chapter on Clemens Point without addressing the path Arthur is now set on, one that is inextricably tied to his declining health. While this may seem too early in the story to focus on his illness, the morality surrounding Arthur's actions, his growing disdain for debt collection, and his lingering ruthlessness in prioritizing the gang's survival make the moment of returning to Downs' house significant. Now, it's an event that stands on its own, but when you take a step back and take into account all of the money-lending missions and contrasting them from Horseshoe Overlook to the nature of them in Clemens Point, it begins to feel punitive in a different way. Now, within the contents of Arthur's journal, he's made it pretty clear that he's never liked going out and collecting the debts for Strauss. He's genuinely repulsed by it. It's disgusting, dirty work. He'd much rather go out and rob people. As far as he sees it, that's much more honest. And in his journal, he even recalls the way Archie, Thomas's son, looked at him the day he beat Thomas Downs half to death, writing as if he was the devil himself, and perhaps to the boy he was. But from Horseshoe Overlook to Clemens Point, the kinds of people Strauss lends money to remain the same, desperate and vulnerable. But the extent of their suffering becomes harder for Arthur to ignore, as well as the extents people would go to in order to just pay them back. You see, at Horseshoe Overlook, Arthur collected debts from Chick Matthews, Mr. Roble, Lily Millett, and he was expected to collect from Thomas Downs. Robo and Downs in particular reinforced Arthur's belief that Strauss was reckless in lending money to anyone willing to take it. Robo was an immigrant who didn't speak the language, and Downs was a dying man, both incapable of ever repaying their debts. But the other two, Chick Matthews and Lily Millett, were a different kind of problem. Chick attempted to escape and stash his money in a tree, while Arthur had to fight a man unwilling to let him collect Lily's debt. While Robo's situation was tragic, and it had to be some kind of a blow, he is in a foreign land where some man basically just robbed him of at least an heirloom of sorts. All things considered, he still seemed to be doing pretty well. He had his own home, stables, and a warm bed. What Arthur did to Downs was something else entirely, encouraging a dying man to sell his land or even his wife to settle his debt. It was cruel, even by the gang standards, and the consequences of that act would follow Arthur for the rest of his short life. But in contrast, Chick got what he deserved, and Lily's debt was almost more trouble than it was worth. In Clemens Point, Arthur has to collect the debt from Gwen Hughes, Winston Holmes, and the remaining debt from the Downs family that now continues onto his wife and son following his death. Unlike the previous bunch, Gwen Hughes, Winston Holmes, and Edith Downs all pay. Among the debtors Arthur collects from, Gwen Hughes stands out as the most repulsive. Rather than making any real attempt to repay what he owes, he resorts to grave robbing, while Arthur stands watch in the cemetery. The sheer audacity of it is enough to make Arthur audibly react in disbelief, as even he is taken back by the lengths Hughes was willing to go. Then there's Winston Holmes, whose situation is arguably more tragic. Unlike Hughes, he at least tries to make good on his debt, proposing to pay it off by hunting a rare cougar and selling its pelt. However, the plan proves fatal. He's killed in the attempt, but not before revealing to Arthur that he had no job, no income, and no realistic way to ever repay the money, especially with the crushing interest Strauss has imposed on him. These encounters only deepen Arthur's disgust on the work he's doing, making it increasingly clear that Strauss isn't just lending to the desperate, he's trapping them in impossible situations and using Arthur to break them even further. Something that's not lost on him when he revisits the Downs estate. Edith and Archie are still reeling from Thomas's death, forced to abandon their home before they've even had the chance to properly mourn him. And now Arthur arrives to take what little money they somehow managed to hang on to. While he isn't in the same dire circumstances as the Downs family, he does carry a certain level of respect when he approaches them, offering a half-hearted apology. But he doesn't sugarcoat the reason why he's here. He still needs that money. Understandably, Edith is resentful of Arthur, blaming him for practically killing Thomas and his debt. Though he quickly shifts the blame back to Thomas, reminding Edith that he knew the risks when he took the loan. When she pushes back again, arguing that Arthur had a choice just as Thomas did, Arthur doesn't deny it. Instead, he simply pleads with her to hand over the money, as if he just wants to get it over with.
You ever wonder about eternity? You should.
I hope it's hot and terrible, Mrs. Downs. Otherwise, I'll feel I've been sold a false bill of goods. Now, please, give me that money. Either you got a lazy eye or lack of respect. Which is it, boy?
I ain't got no lazy eye. No respect for the likes of you.
Well, maybe when your mother's finished mourning your father, I'll keep her in black, on your behalf. You think on that, boy?
It's interesting to consider how things might have played out if Archie hadn't been there, bringing out Arthur's aggression, calling him out for the way he was looking at him, full of quiet menace. Without that moment of tension, had it just been Arthur and Edith, would he have shown more remorse or sadness? Would he have let them go, wiping away their debt? Or would he have done the exact same thing and continued to project his own guilt, which I do believe Arthur actually does a little bit here. While I'd love to look at him as a cold-hearted outlaw, in the end he really has a heart, as Mary Linton and many of the gang's women have pointed out to him so many times before. That projection of his is especially clear in his response to Edith's pointed question about eternity. He brushes it off with sarcasm, saying he hopes wherever he's headed is hot and terrible, because deep down, that's what he truly believes he deserves. It's a sentiment that he doubles down on and struggles to stop believing come the game's conclusion in Beaver Hollow, for all the terrible things he's done, especially to the vulnerable souls Strauss sent him after. Arthur has no illusions about where his path is leading, no matter how much he does his best to believe in Dutch and his notions about without salvation, I had considered diving deeper into Arthur's capture by Colm, exploring whether it was part of a ploy by Micah to get rid of him, or how Colm's plan might have succeeded had Arthur not managed to escape. However, that territory leans more into speculation and theory. Instead, it better serves this video to focus on the broader themes at play. How the money-lending missions, the relentless southern climate, Arthur's torture and gunshot wounds at the hands of the O'Driscolls, and Sean's brutal death all share one common thread: their impact on Arthur and the gang's overall well-being. Gorma is often seen as the turning point where Arthur's declining health becomes undeniable, but I believe it's Clemens Point that marks the true beginning of the end, well before the gang itself realizes it. The chapter can be summed up as a slow descent that is only immediately realized after the kidnapping of Jack. There were brief opportunities to course correct even after Jack's safe return, but they all ultimately go ignored. The gang suffers its real casualties since Blackwater and Clemens Point. They burn the bridges in the south in the most extreme way possible, wiping out every grain roads and setting fire to the Braithwaite estate, incinerating Catherine's sons in the process. Their arrogance in believing they could outmaneuver the wealthy Southerners backfires spectacularly. In their reckless thirst for vengeance, they lash out with such force that the Pinkertons arrive almost immediately, sensing the blood in the water. This is not just another chapter, it's the moment the gang starts losing control. And beyond the chaos and violence, this chapter is most significant for the changes happening within Arthur himself. The weight of his choices are starting to settle on him, even if he refuses to fully acknowledge it. His word as a debt collector, something he once did begrudgingly and without much thought, is beginning to repulse him. The look in young Archie Downs' eyes lingers in his mind, just as a memory of Thomas Downs' coughing blood into his face lingers in his body. Arthur doesn't know it yet, but he's already paying the price for his actions. Clemens Point marks the beginning of his moral reckoning. We see him strengthening his bonds with some gang members, showing a growing capacity for care and understanding, yet at the same time we also see his cold, pragmatic side still at work, doing whatever it takes to keep the gang alive, even if it means preying on the very same weak. The struggle between the man he's been and the man he might become is already slowly unfolding before us. What happened with Thomas Downs is no longer just a job long since done and forgotten, it's a shadow creeping up behind him, a consequence yet to reveal its full weight, and by the time Arthur realizes what it truly means, it'll be far too late. By that time, Arthur would be caught in the middle, stretched and possibly thin between his own failing health, his growing concern for John, and his desperate attempts to keep Dutch from leading them all off a cliff. He's trying to balance it all, but the weight is unbearable. Dutch's decisions would grow reckless by the day, endangering not just the gang, but the Wapiti natives and even John himself. Arthur would eventually watch everything spiral out of control, and no matter how hard he tries, he can't seem to stop it. Sure, there might have been a whole plethora of regrets, ifs, wishes, and longings to do something differently, but maybe in hindsight, for us anyways, maybe him putting his foot down with Dutch in the moment where he decides to rob both the Grays and Braithwaites, maybe it all would have been drastically differently. That one decision, that one change, that could have altered everything, just as Arthur's one decision to beat Thomas Downs eventually changed everything.
I ain't in the revenge business, Dutch. Least of all for something happened a long time ago.
Usually with these videos, I like to start off with a profound quote. A line of dialogue or a particular scene I believe best sets the tone for both the video and the character question is headed in. And I do that so it gives a good idea for the trajectory and the evolution that'll happen at some point in time that's pivotal for the character. This video is different, as Red Dead Redemption 2 itself is quite different. The opening hours of Coulter and Horseshoe Overlook are as much about the gang, the interrelationships, the established hierarchy, and the failing way of life they live by just as much as it is about Arthur. As the game progresses and Arthur's complex character begins to unravel more alongside the goalpost, Dutch moves further and further away. The chapters in Arthur's mentality, which is a very big factor in the story's tonal shift, and Arthur's own character development and what happens towards the end, means that ultimately every chapter has its own theme, its own essence, its own point of significance. We aren't just playing another character on a revenge quest or doing anything in his power to live and continue the way that he has been doing for the entirety of his life. We are, in fact, witnessing the final year of someone's life. Someone who was saved at a very young age, taught how to read and write, a massive privilege and gesture of affection by the man who took him in, further molding him how to properly carry and conduct himself. to have honor and respect in being their own version of an outlaw, to never pursue someone out of revenge, and only take from those who can afford to share and only kill those that are worthy of it. All core values and tenets taught to him at a young age that he took with him to his final days. From writing and illustrating inside of his journal, teaching the newer members such as Sadie, Charles, and Lenny just how Dutch and their gang is truly different from other cold-blooded outlaws like the O'Driscolls, and even questioning the man who taught him everything he knew when he seemed truly lost. Red Dead Redemption 2 is a story of not just the dying ways of the West, but Arthur coming to terms with questioning everything he knew, what he learned, and the person he all learned it from. It's not easy to face the person you once were or all the actions you committed, especially when you weren't proud of it in the moment. And now that death is knocking at the door, you feel more unworthy of love or any kind of salvation than ever before. And depending on how you play, you can get a very different Arthur from start to finish, making that sense of unworthiness that much more profound. Now I want to end this off with a quote that I can't remember exactly where I saw it, but regardless of how you play, I think it still ultimately rings true. And it goes, Arthur is the perfect example of fighting not because of you holding hate for who's in front of you or wanting to fight them, but fighting them because of just how much love you have for those that stand behind you.
You know, nothing means more to me than this gang. The bond we share. It's the most real thing to me. I would kill for it, I would happily die for it.
The story of the Vanderlyn gang and Arthur's own position within the criminal organization begins immediately following their hasty retreat into the Grizzly Mountains. The gang has suffered what we know as its most dramatic casualty list to date following a single robbery. Jenny Kirk, a young woman who rode with the gang, known only by her name, was killed. John Marston took a bullet in the arm. Davy Callender received a bullet to the stomach, while Sean McGuire and Matt Callender's whereabouts were left unknown. Arthur Morgan, while not participating directly in the robbery, did end up losing his own personal horse in the ensuing gunfight that spilled into the city streets. This subsequent gunfight involving the Vanderlyn gang, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and local law enforcement would see so much blood stain the city streets that the state would be on lockdown for the rest of the year. A decision reinforced with the scores of Pinkerton agents roaming the state of New Austin carrying the word of the cold-blooded murder of Heidi McCourt. Miss McCourt was described as a single mother who was an innocent bystander in the robbery. Reports were conflicting at worst and a bit murky at best on the what, how, and why of her killing, but one thing was certain: Dutch Vanderlyn was the one who pulled the trigger, taking her life and initiating the subsequent shooting that'll come to be known as the Blackwater Massacre. With the law hot on their tail, the gang would scramble into a hasty retreat up into the mountains, leaving behind a trail of bodies, all of their money, much of their belongings, and any hope of a better future. Now was simply a matter of survival. The gang came together in a moment of tragedy, and now they finally reunite in the cover of darkness, where Davy Callender succumbs to his wounds.
Miss Gaskell, get that fire lit, quick. Miss Jones, bring in whatever blankets we have. Mr. Pearson, see what we've got in terms of food.
Davy's dead.
Another life claimed by the Blackwater Massacre.
Listen to me, all of you, for a moment. We lost some folks. Now, if I could throw myself in the ground in their stead, I'd do it. Gladly. We've been through worse than this before. Now, all of you, get yourselves warm. Stay strong. Stay with me.
Preaching the importance of unity now more than ever before, we get our first glimpse into the mind of the silver-tongued Dutch Vanderlyn. Not shying away from the ugly truth of losing invaluable family members, Dutch reassures the rest of his loved ones of their safety. The high-end likelihood of being followed into a storm as unforgiving as they just did, along with his and Arthur's task of finding food, promises the beginning of their better fortune so long as they stick with him. As long as they continue to follow his leadership, all will be okay. But once seeing Arthur step outside, Arthur's question of what truly transpired in Blackwater is only met with an enduring, "We missed you." That's what happened. An elusive response that's dismissed in the moment. However, rest assured, Arthur's inability to ever properly acquire a straight answer from Dutch, or even receiving an appropriate explanation of what happened and why it happened by the others that were directly involved in the furry job and witnessed Dutch's killing of Heidi McCourt, would resonate in Arthur's mind much later. For the moment, Dutch and Arthur would disappear into the darkness until they bump into one of the two men Dutch had sent ahead of the gang in search for some shelter.
You up ahead! Who's there? Whoa! Micah.
Gentlemen,
Found anything?
I think so. Found a little homestead down that way.
Okay. Anyone home?
Sure. Place is blazing with light and noise. Sounded like a party.
Let's go see.
Follow me.
The other scout was John Marston, who is currently unaccounted for. Blaming the temporary absence of John on the current storm, Dutch, Arthur, and Micah figured it was best to investigate a homestead nearby. Micah had reported bustling with lights and many voices inside. Now, the homestead would be a very tragic location itself. Despite Dutch cleverly deciding to approach as a lonely, stranded man looking for help, instructing Arthur and Micah to provide overwatch for Dutch in case things went awry, it would have all been in vain as the home was taken over and occupied by members of the violent O'Driscoll gang, a gang that had been feuding with the Vanderland gang for years, all stemming from a personal hatred between Dutch and the O'Driscoll's leader, Colm O'Driscoll. Between the O'Driscoll's affinity for violence and the members recognizing Dutch, there would be no other option than yet another shootout. The man would be put down without hesitation, but the tragedy wasn't the killing of outlaws working for the rivals. No, that would be the massacre of the Adler couple. Jake Adler's frozen body would be discovered by Micah outside his home in a wagon. Signs of his struggle inside the home would be spotted by Arthur by way of pool of blood and broken shelves. However, Sadie Adler, Jake's wife, would not only survive the harrowing ordeal, but would even be discovered by Micah. Traumatized by the monstrosity unleashed upon her husband, Sadie would, in a state of absolute panic, defend herself with a knife. That is until Dutch was able to calm her down, place a jacket over her, and reassure her that no harm shall fall upon her once more. She's in fact safe.
Miss, now, it is gonna be okay. We mean you no harm. Miss! Come on. It'll be okay. We need to get out of here, and quick! Come on now. Oh.
This night would give birth to Sadie's passionate hatred for Annie O'Driscoll here on, solidified Dutch as a warm, kind, and caring soul as far as she was concerned, and finally for Dutch, that Colm and his gang are really up in the mountains after him. At least that was the reason he would later give Arthur as to why they were going to go after Colm, while both gangs were isolated from any outside interference. Or worse, the law that is definitely on their tails. With Sadie rescued, food acquired from her home before it burned down, and information on the O'Driscolls up in the mountains alongside them, Dutch, Arthur, and Micah would retire for the night, finally getting some rest and shelter from the cold. But not everyone was back safely with the gang.
I'm sorry to ask, but
It's little John. He's got himself caught into a scrape again.
he ain't been seen in two days.
Your John will be fine. I mean, he may be as dumb as rocks and as dull as rusted iron, but that ain't changing because he got caught in some snowstorm.
John was now missing, and it's been 2 days since the last anyone has seen or heard a thing from him. Now, under normal circumstances, this may be no cause for concern. Yet the Vanderland gang is not only on the run from a law enforcement force that's more aggressive and determined than ever before, there's the addition of their fierce O'Driscoll rivals being up here, and they just faced a severe storm the night before that is only just barely beginning to let up. Between the climate and the gang's overall situation, Abigail's worry of John's disappearance was fully valid. It was only thanks to Hosea Matthews, the gang's second-in-command, Dutch's right-hand man, and the voice of reason, intervening, reinforcing Abigail's fear of the worst happening to John, did Arthur and Javier finally decide to go out and look for him. Even with the pair listening to Hosea's request for a rescue mission, the feelings of Arthur towards John were exposed in that moment between him and Abigail. He referred to John as dumb as rocks and dull as rusted iron, but his fortune won't change, nor will his mentality, all because of a small snowstorm. As he and Javier first rode out, Arthur would even say, "For all we know, John kept riding north and never looked back. This wouldn't be the first time. An act committed from the past hasn't been fully forgiven, and as such, unresolved feelings all tied to the situation, how it played out, and how everyone forgave John would slowly reveal itself as the reason why Arthur speaks and acts this way towards his adopted brother. It's an issue that Arthur is slow to share with anyone, and so for now, where the objective is to locate John, Arthur's time with Javier would be fruitless in terms of acquiring more information on what exactly happened in Blackwater. Unlike Arthur, Javier was actually present on the ferry when everything went wrong. All Javier could really add to this overall mystery was Dutch killing a woman in a bad way. It's dismissed and easily overlooked as Javier points out everything went wrong, and so the blow of Dutch uncharacteristically killing an innocent woman out in cold blood wouldn't really stand out. But the name of Heidi McCourt and the details of her killing is something that'll really never be forgotten. Not only was it the catalyst of the downfall of the Vanderlyn gang, a complete shift in life for many people that lived in Blackwater following the Blackwater massacre, but even the details and the effect on the people there is much worse than we'll ever really know. John, later in the game, when he's finally able to compose himself long enough to reflect on that moment, actually witnessing Heidi die, would struggle to articulate the brutality and gory details behind it. John himself was no stranger to bullets and blood, but it had to be something heinous, so traumatic and shocking that even he couldn't or really wouldn't want to make any sense of it, as that would force him to think more about it. It's much easier to take a deep breath and focus on the here and now. Here and now is where Arthur and Javier had to be as they home in on the distant voice of John calling for help.
That's quite a scratch you got there.
Never thought I'd say this, but it's good to see you, Arthur Morgan.
Clinging to the edge of a cliff, John was taking shelter from the unforgiving cold while doing his best to avoid being fully eaten by the wolves that attacked him and his horse. His horse wasn't as lucky as he is. A survivor of a brutal attack unleashed by a pack of wolves did leave John with a cut-up arm, a busted leg hindering his ability to walk, and slashes across his face. Slashes that will not only settle into an iconic, instantly recognizable scar, but will serve as a memory of the darkest days the Vanderlyn gang was pitted up against, hiding up in the Grizzlies. With John safely back with the rest of the gang, the remaining time was spent consolidating while considering their next move. Arthur would learn how to properly hunt game with a bow, avoiding damaging the pelt or meat one could properly get. And this was thanks to the help of one of the newer members of the gang, Charles Smith. The man had seriously injured his hand sometime during the gang's escape out of Blackwater, so he was unable to hunt as efficiently as he could, but he found Arthur to be just as good with the right amount of guidance. The discourse between Arthur and Charles is also incredibly insightful into not only how the gang perceives Dutch, but people that eventually fall under his leadership. Now, Charles is by no means delusional, as he does argue against Hosea about the inability to rob and kill people pleasantly, as they don't, in spite of Dutch's talk, but he does point out Dutch is quite different. He has morals, values, goals, and does appear to look out for everyone. He also treats Charles fair, something that was incredibly difficult to find for someone who was half Native American and half African American. Yes, Charles can fall in with another gang or go off doing his own thing, but he's done both of those before, and the way he sees it, he has no want, no need, no desire to leave. Arthur would express his own gratitude personally as well as on behalf of the gang for Charles's commitment. They talk of how long Arthur's been riding with Dutch. For 20 years of sticking by his side. 20 years, that was all thanks to Hosea and Dutch taking in a young delinquent, teaching him how to read, write, and separate himself from savages like the O'Driscolls. Now, like many things when replaying this game, you'll pick up on small pieces of information here or there. Maybe a seemingly insignificant piece of dialogue is just overlooked. But when you go back a second or third time, there's so much more insight provided in just a few small words. Now, I've pointed out, not only here but in many other videos, Charles' determination to stick with his gang due to Dutch being so different and standing for something that matters, in addition to treating him like a human being. But this time, what really stands out is how Arthur says Charles has been with them for roughly 5 to 6 months, and the two of them have never really talked. This would be the first time that they properly had some kind of discourse. If you didn't know, you can actually dive into Arthur's journal and get a glimpse of his mentality and the state of the gang predating the Blackwater massacre, long before we're even introduced to the gang's current predicament here within the chapter of culture. And while Arthur does mention other members such as Jenny, Micah, and how Dutch met Micah, Arthur never mentions Charles. Granted, there isn't much of anyone he mentions, aside from Jenny, Micah, Trelawney, and the disruptive fighting between Abigail and John that seemed to get worse by the day as they were getting closer to the Blackwater job. I guess even saying his old journal got burned down in a fire as he does in the beginning of his current journal could explain the lack of Charles being mentioned, along with everyone else. Yet, even with those who are mentioned in the current one, they're either important due to the gang's current plans, them being brand new faces, or they were causing so much of a problem that Arthur can't help but actually ignore it, such as in John's case. Charles, during culture though, is quiet, is mild-mannered, and he's a person who has no problem carrying his own weight. Hell, he'd even go out of his own way to do as much extra as he could, and that could very well be why Arthur never really paid him that much mind or had a real conversation with him. Circumstances were now much different. They needed each other now more than ever. Despite having his hand injured, having someone like Charles here with them was more invaluable than ever before, and so I would argue, had the gang not been through this, who's to say the lack of familiarity between the two of them wouldn't have carried on for quite some time longer. At the end of the day, neither one of them seemed to really like sitting around camp doing whatever, and as long as they're not causing problems for each other or the gang while making sure needs are met, it would make sense. It's just quite a contrast from where they started to where they would eventually end up, or even in a few short months, going from Horseshoe Overlook to Clemens Point. But now that the pair hadn't hunted enough meat to last them, the next move was waiting for an opportune moment to escape out of the mountains. Hosea mentioned the direction they'd be headed in now is out east, instead of the promised virgin lands of the west. The change of direction would cause concern for Arthur. As he put it, they'd be heading towards all the civilization, something that's undoubtedly set with its own challenges and caused many problems in of itself, and Hosea does agree with Arthur's apprehension, but their problems, as he put it, are bigger out west. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place, but it was better taking their chances in more civilized territory than going back facing the hail of bullets the Pinkertons had waiting, and the California collar for any survivors or those valuable enough to be used as examples for the rest of any outlaws that defied the new era of law that was right around the corner. They had a direction in mind. Whenever the weather was clear, the gang would be able to finally escape. However, there was a disagreement between the gang's leadership. Dutch, whether if he truly believed Colm O'Driscoll was up here in the mountains for him, wanted to take the opportunity to finally kill his longtime rival, or at the very least steal the train robbery the O'Driscolls were planning right underneath them in a move to irritate Colm.
I know you hate him, Dutch.
He's here for us.
I doubt that.
No, you're just doubting me.
Due to any of these single reasons, or perhaps a mixture of the three, Dutch decided now was the best opportunity to take out his longtime rival, or at the very least steal the train robbery from him in a move to further irritate Colm. In an effort to encourage those under his leadership to do so, Dutch would set this up as hitting Colm before he hits them, a lesson he claims to have learned from past experiences. And in addition to all this, hitting Colm would allow the Vanderlyn gang to seize the detonators, explosives, and plans that the O'Driscolls had on the train robbery for themselves. Should the Vanderlyn gang be successful in everything, they should be able to secure the money from the train robbery that would not only be enough to set the gang up for the future, but would come at the exact moment when the weather would begin to clear. Theoretically speaking, in terms of planning for the future, it sounded like a great plan, but Arthur, thinking logically, would seemingly be the only person to question Dutch's intentions or actual reason behind attacking the O'Driscolls, as the Vanderlyn gang were in bad shape as it was. They just got enough food to feed everyone, and even though John was the only one missing up here, and he was now back with them, he was far from a state of being able to move or be of any sort of use. The weather was still bad, Charles' hand was still injured, the gang could barely care for themselves, let alone put together some type of force in good enough shape to successfully hit their rivals. Dutch would just shrug off his adopted son's concerns and reinforce the great move hitting a train would be, especially using the information and equipment Colm has put together. As he says, Colm's information is always solid. Without any further discussion between the two of them, Dutch would hand Arthur a rifle and some rope. As with many decisions made by Dutch within the game, Hell, maybe even starting as early as a Blackwater ferry job. It's interesting to think that had Dutch heeded Arthur and even Hosea's concerns, who sounded as if he was thinking very similarly to Arthur in terms of taking the gang's position in account, actually considering what they needed ahead of making moves or thinking in a way that could have cost them even more lives and put them in an overall worse position than they already were, as it seemed that was the way Dutch was thinking. Had he listened to these two people, then maybe it could have been possible for the Vanderlyn gang to just wait for the thaw, lay low, and slip out further east when the weather let up. The train ice they stole from their Driscolls, after all, would be the catalyst behind the business mogul Leviticus Cornwall investing so heavily into the Pinkerton Detective Agency, flooding it with damn near limitless resources with his own personal interest, driving him to physically call out Dutch the first time he has a chance to, as well as dumping more and more money and manpower to the point of the man, Leviticus Cornwall, and his damn near bottomless amounts of resources becoming a problem that ultimately has to be dealt with, at the very least specifically for Dutch, if he ever had the faintest hope of not constantly looking over his shoulder or worried that he would end up in one of the many places that Leviticus had some type of presence in. Of course, that would just be speculation. In the typical bravado he's known for, Dutch would carry out the attack on the O'Driscolls, leaving dozens of lifeless bodies behind for Colm to find as a dead giveaway of the apparent failure to defend the valuable supplies for the robbery they had planned for themselves. On their way back to camp, Arthur would capture a man by the name of Kieran Duffy, bring him back to camp where, when the time was right, Dutch and all of his enforcers would extract as much information out of him on the possible whereabouts of Colm, his hideouts, and the plans he may have for the future. Kieran would of course deliver when the time was right, but for the next few weeks, the Vanderlyn gang would focus on laying low, wait for a break in the weather, and again, against Hosea's better judgment, would ride out to hit Leviticus Cornwall's train.
Why are we doing this? Weather's breaking, we could leave. I thought we was lying low. I just don't want any more folks to die, Dutch.
We're living, Hosea, we're living. Look at me. We're living, even you. But we need money. Everything we has in Blackwater. You fancy heading back there?
No.
It would be another successful move for the Vanderlyn gang, albeit one with some massive repercussions. The initial plan was to have Bill blow the train tracks, Dutch take control of the driver and engineer, Charles handles any outriders that may appear, Lenny and Javier take the front cars, while Arthur and Micah go straight for the back car. That is where Leviticus' private car and sought-after valuables would be located. Due to the failure of the explosives going off, they would have to improvise. Arthur and Lenny would be the only ones to successfully jump onto and stay on board the train, fighting through a heavy security force desperately trying to take control of the train's engine, forcing it to a complete stop, allowing the rest of the gang to catch up, but the remaining security force guarding the train would do so as well, resulting in much more bloodshed. By the time the smoke settled, the dozens of bodies that littered the floor pictured a scene reminiscent of the aftermath from the O'Driscoll camp. Lifeless bodies telling a story of a ruthlessly efficient gang that made off with anything of value in Mr. Cornwall's private rail car. Expensive whiskeys, coins, watches, papers tied to business plans, and most importantly, bearer bonds. Sure, it'll take some time to resell them under the right conditions, however, given enough time, it will definitely pay back the gang, and then some. Arthur would be left behind to deal with the small handful of survivors as well as the train, and once he returns back to camp in Coulter, Dutch and Hosea have finally decided, based off the robbery they just pulled off, in addition to favorable weather conditions, now was the time to descend down the mountains. After weeks of hiding, the gang would emerge from the freezing cold, hopeful of a positive change in their fortune. Hosea had already planned a new spot for them to set up a new camp at, despite it being quite some time since the last time he was physically out there, but he did remember the location of Horseshoe Overlook near Valentine. As long as they keep their noses clean, they should have no problem hiding out nearby, and the town could provide them with the opportunities they need to properly get back on their feet. A small footnote here is, Hosea and Arthur would travel together in the wagon trailing behind the rest of the gang, and for the first time, it appeared Arthur and Hosea were finally given a moment to talk between themselves about Dutch, what transpired in Blackwater, and the gang's plans for the future.
And this place we're going, wait, well, what's it called again?
Horseshoe Overlook.
It's a good place to lie low?
It'll do for now. And how low do you think Dutch is really going to lie? It's just, you know, maybe it's me who's changed, not him, but we kept telling him that ferry job didn't feel right. You and me had a real lead in Blackwater that could have worked out.
Maybe.
It just isn't like Dutch to lose his head like that.
Now ultimately, Hosea had no information outside of what Arthur had already known. As Hosea was preoccupied with the same scam Arthur was, during the time Dutch and the rest of the gang decided to proceed with the ferry job. Whatever the cause for Dutch to lose his head then, right now, they do have a chance to somewhat recover. And they would, so long as all of them, especially Dutch, lays low and keeps his head together.
Got off the mountain, rode east into some pretty enough country called the Heartlands. Ain't been this far east in many a year. Dutch seems a little better. His eyes are sparkling once more, and I can see he's thinking a little clearer. I think we all feel a little happier, in spite of Blackwater and that whole mess.
With the new camp set up, warmer weather to take advantage of, and the local town of Valentine to explore, after a couple weeks, everyone, including Hosea and Arthur, felt more optimistic than before for what lay ahead. Arthur would jot down his thoughts on Dutch appearing to have a much clearer head and even a sparkle in his eye. The time for rebuilding everything that they had lost before their massive retreat into the mountains was now, and everyone had a job to do, a specific way for them to contribute, making sure they all paid their fair share and everyone was taken care of. The women would help around camp under the watchful eye of Miss Grimshaw. Mr. Pearson immediately got to work feeding everyone. Micah and Lenny were sent off as scouts before Horseshoe Overlook was even fully set up, and Leopold Strauss had been wasting no time finding anyone down on their luck or willingly ignorant enough to accept his harsh money-lending terms, as that was his own means to keep the mouths around camp fed. Once the new camp was stable enough, the camp's enforcers would soon venture into Valentine. Initially, they were supposed to come into the town under the guise of traveling workers. Their story was, their factory up north had just closed down, and that was why they were here in Valentine. Although in light of the type of attention they'd attract in the town saloon, you can only wonder just how much of that the local population had actually bought. From the outside looking in, with everyone spreading out, wasting no opportunity to secure work or extra money for the gang, Horseshoe Overlook really looked and felt as if we were witnessing how the Vanderlyn gang operated before everything that happened in Blackwater, and before the dawn of the new era of stricter laws being imposed. The feeling of this being a newer, more optimistic bunch was felt so strongly that it's never really created again at any point in the game. But here, we are still reminded through character banter and feelings towards each other that many of these members have long-standing history.
Ow! 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 Careful not to work yourself to death there, Uncle.
I was thinking.
Yeah, does it pay well?
Oh, eventually.
So, while the rest of us are busy stealing, killing, lying, fighting to try to survive, you get to think all day.
With some pressure of the law and the need to survive through an unforgiving winter finally alleviated, they're able to return to a more relaxed and comfortable state between each other. While they, just as much as we are reminded through certain events unfolding, such as Arthur saving Reverend Swanson not once but twice from being killed.
What the hell is wrong with you? What the hell is wrong with you? Throwing me off a bridge like
there
that?
There was a goddamn train, you crazy bastard!
Tilly Jackson being recognized and snatched by an old gang member she used to ride with, leaving them behind on particularly bad terms.
That does not look ideal.
Excuse me.
And Arthur being recognized in Valentine as someone that hung around sometime before in Blackwater, keeps the gang, at least the more cautious and prudent types, wary of what they do and how much attention they draw to themselves. That's not to say there isn't downtime or wonderful time spent. On the contrary, Arthur's ride with Hosea to go out and hunt a massive bear would be nothing if not peaceful and quite insightful into the relationship these two have, as well as Arthur's issues with John. Without approaching his brother directly, he finally admits the resentment and harsh jokes that came at John's expense weren't signs of malice or really ill will wishing upon him, rather pain and disappointment in how John felt it much easier to just cut everyone off and run.
So how are things with you and John? It about time you let it go now?
It was a year, Hosea. He ditched us for a goddamn year. Running off on that kid is one thing, but there's code. He knows that. He ain't Trelawney. Dutch and you pretty much raised him. Nobody else would have been welcomed back that easy after that long, and you know it.
John feeling so ill-prepared for fatherhood and the responsibilities that came with it, from Arthur's perspective, it was way too easy for him to just leave the gang, Abigail and his son, for a full year without a single word. As Arthur put it, they have a code. John knew that, and if it was anyone else, they wouldn't have been welcomed back as easily as John was. Despite there being truth to what Arthur said, him attempting to justify his feelings and position with John behind the code their gang values so heavily is more so to not betray his unresolved feelings of his brother just leaving him behind. Family, as Vandal and gang often viewed themselves as, don't just leave. The time Arthur spends with Hosea is also incredibly valuable, albeit quite short. The brief moment of hunting a bear with Hosea would be written down fondly by the feared enforcer saying, "I love Dutch like a father, but in many ways, I love Hosea more. He's kind and fair and like a human being. Dutch is something else." Arthur was clearly very capable of seeing at this point in the game, there was quite a contrast between his two adopted fathers. While he may be extremely grateful and loyal to Dutch, there's a gentleness attached to Hosea that Arthur admires. Now, based off other entries in his journal, it makes you wonder if his specific type of admiration for Hosea stems from feelings of guilt he has about himself. Seeing a ruthlessness in Dutch that's there in himself, but in certain circumstances it may be there in Hosea, but more often than not, it's either missing or not as harsh as Dutch in himself. If you dive into Arthur's journal, he comments on doing things he's not proud of or feeling guilty out of doing something he felt was necessary for the gang's survival. A big example of this is anything tied to Strauss's money lending schemes. Arthur's the one sent out to retrieve the money from anyone who decided it was a good idea to accept money from Strauss. And Arthur very blatantly states this type of work shames him. He doesn't like it. There's no honor or glory in it. He much prefers robbing someone directly to their face rather than getting money from them this way, even though technically this is the more legal way to do it. When he shares his thoughts about beating Thomas Downs for the money he owes the gang, so yes, canonically speaking, he does put his hands on Thomas, Arthur mentions the entire ordeal confused him. He shares Thomas's son, Archie, stared at him as if he was the devil. Maybe to him, Arthur is. The whole thing, particularly the part he plays in it, he says revolts him. A little while later, when the gang is moving from Horseshoe Overlook to Clemens Point, Arthur and Charles were tasked by Dutch to go and scout for a location that'll be a good spot for them to set up a brand new camp at, during which Charles and Arthur would come across a mother and her two children who were hiding underneath a wagon. The mother was terrified of what her and her children had just been through, so much so, in fact, she clenched onto a shotgun completely white-knuckled. Her husband was taken by some local bandits for ransom. Her and her children would plead for Arthur and Charles to help, but Arthur, without a moment's hesitation, would just send them on their way.
Get the hell out of
They
here!
took off Ozza.
Who did?
Men last night.
Where did they take him?
Ain't no business of ours. I don't even speak their language.
You ain't as tough and dense as all that. Come on, Arthur.
Now, Charles, on the other hand, stepped in, offered their assistance, and even chastised Arthur for being so cold-blooded, willing to just send a woman and her children out on their own, which is bad enough as it is, but to be incapable of speaking the language of the country, the father has been taken away, they practically have no chance to survive on their own. And yet Arthur's concern was really the camp that they're hiding in, and not so much just helping them out. We don't see it, but in his journal, Arthur would reflect on that particular situation. He would even specifically say that he admires Charles, that he's a good man, that he wishes that he was like Charles, that doing something good came to him much more naturally. It wasn't something that he would have to think about, feeling like he has to use some type of logic to justify him doing the right thing. As he says, it feels like there's always this constant battle within him between good and evil. In these isolated incidents, there's another side to Arthur that no one else really sees. We might see someone that's cold-blooded and willing to just beat the hell out of someone for money, or despite him saying he doesn't like this type of work blatantly, even agreeing with Dutch on the topic of going and collecting a debt from someone, or the side where he's so willing to just send a woman and her children out into the wilderness without a second thought. And then in the journal, seeing it from the other side of the fence, acknowledging that, yeah, maybe he is the bad guy in these situations. Perhaps Archie's right for looking at him this type of way. Maybe Charles really was right for stepping in and saving this woman and children, and Arthur was ashamed that it was something that he had to think about, that he needed someone there to reason with him for it to make sense. By itself, from what we see and what we read, it adds another layer to Arthur. But when you take a step back, you know where Arthur is headed, where he's ultimately going to end up at. His comments in terms of reflection within his journal, the things that he says and does in front of everyone, you get a bigger picture of someone that, since the very early hours of the game, appeared to have a very high sense of self-awareness. And who knows, perhaps that was always there. It's possible that it was just put on the back burner because with these goals and plans for the future, the priority was to focus on achieving the goals, reaching Tahiti, reaching the Virgin Lands of the West, getting enough money to just disappear and relaxing. That was the primary goal. And if you have to do all this other stuff that's revolting, that's shameful, that isn't particularly things you're proud or excited to do, at least you can say there's some goodness. Maybe not for myself, but all these people, all these faces that rely on me, that rely on Dutch, that rely on Hosea, John, we're working towards something. And maybe as those dreams started to fall apart more and more and the writing was on the wall, it was just something you couldn't justify anymore. He already felt shame in the moment, with nothing else to show for it. His sickness acquired from doing the very thing he possibly was repulsed by the most. There's no wonder as to why he felt so unworthy of redemption, in spirit or in a social sense. And when you take the other emotional anchor that's introduced in Horseshoe Overlook into account, a rejection of salvation and happiness makes it that much more understanding. And that emotional connection is Mary Linton.
Dear Arthur, it's me. You know it's me from the bad handwriting. I know I said when we last spoke, and I was going off to get married, that we would not speak again. I know I said a lot of things, and I meant them, I suppose, at the time. But I'm not so proud as to not speak to people who care for me, or cared for me. I've been in Valentine for a couple of months. I had some bad luck, and, well, it's a long story and not an interesting one. But I am here for now. I saw a couple of the girls, or whatever the polite term is for them, that ran with you and your associates in town. And I heard tell of a man who sounded like you. I would love to see you again.
I'll discuss Mary and Arthur much more in depth as the game progresses. We see more of her, and there even becomes a time where it looks like her and Arthur might actually be able to run off together and escape, with Arthur having the life that he was rejected so long ago by Mary deciding to not stay by his side and run off with someone else in order to make her family happy. But for now, it's at least worth mentioning her, and shedding light on the words Arthur not only says to her, but about her within the confines of his journal. He loved her, he still loves her, and has deep feelings for her. The first interaction between the two of them, he is wary as to why after so much time she's decided to reach out. Her knowing he was even around is peculiar as it is, considering the gang hasn't been here for that much time and was somewhat keeping a very low profile. Once Arthur learns her husband Barry has passed, giving Mary an opportunity to reach out, the hope of them rekindling or possibly the sourness attached to jumping at him after she's obtained this sense of freedom is all dashed by her plea for help.
My money, my life, me. I wasn't good enough.
I'm sorry. We need your help real bad. Little Jamie's joined the Chelonians, that strange religious order.
Good for him.
They're quite mad, Arthur. They'll kill him. You're the only person he'd listen to.
So, I'm too rough to marry into your family, but it's okay to ask me to help in saving your family.
I'm sorry.
The family that was so quick to call him not good enough, his time, his money, all the effort still wasn't going to cut it. But when they need his help, it's now acceptable for him to be around so long as it's on their own terms. Arthur is sensible enough to acknowledge the poor way he's been treated and the fact that it may be the right thing to just leave Mary and her family problems alone. But he becomes putty in her hands. He feels it. Jamie, her little brother she was so worried about, sees it. Hell, everyone in the Vanderlyn gang also saw it when she was around them. Arthur himself even acknowledges it.
I feel like the luckiest man alive, and I feel like a fool. That woman confuses me and plays me for a fiddle like no one else alive. I trust I will not make a god-awful fool of myself once more, but somehow I imagine I shall.
The story between Arthur and Mary is one that I felt should be highlighted in this video, as it's pretty easily sidelined by the bigger things circulating the gang. Speaking of which, let's get back to that timeline. In between Arthur's quality time with Hosea and a small rekindling with Mary Linton, the Vanderlyn gang as a whole has been making big strides in terms of unity and strengthening their earning potential. Following the fight that erupted in the saloon of Valentine involving Charles, Arthur, Javier, Bill, and the locals, Dutch would arrive with Josiah Trelawney, a member of the Vanderlyn gang that has a very special, loose type of relationship with the gang. They allow him to come and go as he please, and would extend protection out to the eccentric fellow based off the valuable information he provides, which in this case, Josiah would bring news of Sean McGuire, one of the gang's missing members from the failed Blackwater heist. Trelawney would share that Sean is currently in the custody of Ike Skelding's boys, and they were preparing to move him and transfer his custody over to the federal government when he was rescued by Arthur, Charles, and Javier with guidance provided by Trelawney. His rescue would be followed by a massive celebration by the gang upon his return. And it's a celebration with some great timing, as it's followed with Javier and Arthur robbing a homestead together, bringing in some additional cash without major attention being drawn to them. Of course, all the money Arthur was sent out to collect that Herr Strauss has been lending out to various locals all over the state boosted their cash power even more, despite Thomas Downs not actually paying.
Where's our money?
I don't have it.
Sell your place.
We already owe more than it's worth.
Then sell your wife, or your family, or something.
Kieran Duffy, the man Arthur captured up in the Grizzly Mountains after raiding the O'Driscoll camp, was inducted as a full-fledged Vanderlyn gang member after he led an assault force to kill Colm O'Driscoll at his hideout at 6 Point Cabin. Since Colm wasn't there, the raid was technically a failure, albeit coming at the cost of yet another blow to Colm O'Driscoll's manpower pool. But the reason why Kieran was granted status as a trusted member of the Vanderlyn gang was he did end up saving Arthur's life.
You alright?
Sure, thank you.
Meanwhile, John was finally up and moving again. He was somewhat healed from his wounds he sustained in Blackwater and in the mountains by the attack from the wolves. He'd orchestrate a successful robbery on his train. Now, each and every single one of these jobs would help further illustrate the relationships held between every gang member. At times, they were fed up with each other. At times, they joked and laughed at each other. Or, during times with Micah, Arthur's frustration and anger towards someone so callous and hot-headed was on full display.
Oh, I ain't joking, cowpoke. I heard so much bluster out of your mouth these last 6 months. And now, I got an opportunity to watch you be silenced.
Well, you gotta do something.
Why?
The whole chapter of Horseshoe Overlook, Micah was a problem. It doesn't really feel like it as he's separated from everything else, but after he and Lenny were sent off as scouts by Dutch, the pair would find themselves up in the town of Strawberry. Lenny recounts Micah was drunk before he had even gotten into town. Micah ran into someone he knew, drank some more, and killed the man before Lenny knew what happened. Micah was arrested while Lenny was lucky enough to get away, albeit by the skin of his teeth. He rode non-stop all the way back to Horseshoe Overlook, where he, frantically, would inform Arthur and Dutch of what happened. Arthur, at Dutch's behest, would of course go and save Micah from the noose that was undoubtedly going to be tightened around his neck. But before he did so, he went into Valentine with Lenny, where the two of them would get drunk, trying their best to relax and separate themselves from what Lenny had just been through. The time spent here between Lenny and Arthur wouldn't only be one of the most iconic moments shared between Arthur and another character, highlighting the very close friendship the two of them would have, but it would also be the exact moment where Arthur would begin to look at Lenny very differently. On the surface, the laughing, slapping moment of vulnerability Arthur and Lenny have is funny, but there would be a newfound sense of respect for the 19-year-old Lenny from here on out. So much so, in fact, that it's easy to think that if Lenny had been just a few years older or much closer to Arthur's age, the amount of respect he would have commanded would have easily offset the balance of the factions within the Vanderlyn gang that'll later begin to form. Lenny was calm, capable, and listened. 2 out of the 3 things Micah was incapable of doing, yet despite his reluctance, once Lenny was finally calmed, Arthur would head on over to Strawberry to save the man he can't seem to understand why Dutch had so much care for. And what he did as soon as he was freed from jail only made Arthur's curiosity of why the hell Dutch wanted to keep him around just became all the more confusing. As if killing a man and being jailed during such a delicate time for the Vanderlyn gang wasn't bad enough, as Micah ascended from the depths of his jail cell, he would go on to unleash a hail of bullets for anyone in his way, needlessly killing lawmen and locals alike, to then murder 2 people inside their homes to reclaim his precious guns. It was just another bloodbath that was entirely unnecessary. The atrocity he committed this day, in addition to forcing Arthur into aiding him in doing so, would be something Arthur would never forget. It'll serve as just another reminder that Micah is no good for them. He may be capable in a firefight, maybe even useful in securing some money, as he did follow up with a successful wagon robbery after the bloodshed he unleashed in Strawberry, but his temper and intentions are self-serving and detrimental to the gang's well-being. Whether if Arthur fully acknowledged that now or purely hated how Micah carried himself in addition to the unfortunate influence he had on Dutch, the 2 reasons would over time become intertwined, if they ever were really separate issues. But for now, as Arthur returned home to Horseshoe Overlook, he would find Abigail asking for the favor of doing something with Jack. The young boy appears to be down, leaving her worried about him, and John is still distant with her and their son. Arthur would oblige, and he decided to take Jack fishing with him. Little did he know that this small retreat of relaxation and bonding with the youngest gang member would turn into a useful reality check, as none other than Agent Andrew Milton and Agent Edgar Ross, the Pinkerton Detective Agency, would make themselves known.
Arthur, isn't it? Arthur Morgan? Agent Milton? Agent Ross. Pinkerton Detective Agency, seconded to the United States government. You're a wanted man, Mr. Morgan. We want Vanderlyn. This is my offer, Mr. Morgan. Bring in Vanderlyn. You have my word you won't swing. Spare me the philosophy lesson. I've already heard it from Mac Callender.
Mac Callender?
He was pretty shot up by the time I got to him. So really, it was more of a mercy killing. Slow, but merciful.
This unwelcomed visit by the agents shed some light on what happened to the gang's last missing member, Mac Callender. Milton claimed he killed him out of mercy, and Arthur would be blessed with the same kind of mercy if he turns in Dutch Vanderlyn. Considering Milton's discourse with his partner alluding to what the Pinkertons' files on the gang members contained, it's evident based off their knowledge of Arthur Morgan, which seemed quite extensive, Arthur was not going to turn Dutch in. The proposal by Milton served more as a warning that the Pinkerton Detective Agency is in fact closing in. Dutch and the rest of his people had a few weeks head start, but that cushion was very quickly eroding away. With Dutch made aware of the Pinkertons knowing they're in the area, he would make the wise decision of continuing to lay low, do nothing and play it by ear, as the entire thing could have very well just been a scare tactic to trick the gang into making themselves known as a final last-ditch effort to procure one big lump sum of money somewhere. And it's curious how long the gang really would have been able to play it by ear and maintain a low profile had Mr. Leviticus Cornwall not tracked Dutch down in the town of Valentine just a short time later.
My name is Leviticus Cornwall. I am not a man to be messed with by the likes of you.
Since the Vanderlyn gang arrived here in Horseshoe Overlook, they've had their sights on the town of Valentine in different ways. Mary Beth gathered information on a train filled with rich tourists. This turned into the train robbery John had put together. The bank in Valentine was also an option, as Valentine is a livestock town and as such could be unusually loaded with cash, leaving that as a lucrative prospect. And then there was the idea of the specific part of the livestock aspect of Valentine. John had now set up a plan to intercept some ranchers out in the wilderness before they reached Valentine, scare them off, and take the livestock, presenting them as their own. Then he and Arthur would turn around and sell that same livestock at an auction here within Valentine. It wasn't exactly a glamorous job, or even one that was justified through instant gratification, as they would have to wait for the auction and resale of these sheep, on top of 25% kickback to the auctioneers, as they were well aware that these sheep didn't come from Arthur or John. Once their business with the auctioneers was concluded, the pair would head to the local bar to meet with Dutch and Strauss. Their arrival would save Dutch from the company of Leopold Strauss, who was wearing his leader's patience thin. Grateful for the opportunity of getting some peace, Dutch would dismiss both John and Strauss so that he and Arthur can have a moment of peace together. They discuss Dutch's frustration with Strauss and share a toast, but before they can even set their glasses down, the pair are interrupted by none other than Mr. Leviticus Cornwall.
To your good health.
Thank you.
Vanderland! Get out here! Get out
What
here
the
now!
hell?
Vanderland! You don't know me, that you keep robbing me? My name is Leviticus Cornwall. I am not a man to be messed with by the likes of you. Get out here before I have these men killed.
Cornwall's patience has ran extraordinarily thin with the Vanderlyn gang. First, this train was hid up in the Grizzlies. Then, down here, Arthur stole an oil wagon from the local oil refinery, and now, backed into a corner by Cornwall's own armed force, the gang will demonstrate once more just how deadly they can be if threatened and offered no other options. Once Dutch and Arthur emerged from within the bar, any hope for peaceful negotiations were quickly dashed. The situation would begin with Dutch distracting the men that were holding Strauss and John hostage, showing exactly how he got the title of being silver-tongued. He would talk immaculately, albeit in quite a circle. As Dutch was sucking in all of the attention, Arthur would take the opportunity to initiate the shooting. He would begin by killing the guards holding his fellow gang members captive. During this time, Strauss would end up getting shot in the leg, prompting the other three to improvise their escape plan. It was one that worked quite effectively and only took a few seconds to put together. Dutch and John would lift Strauss into a nearby wagon, and the two of them would then push the wagon carrying Strauss down the main street of Valentine with Arthur standing point, returning fire from the mobile cover the wagon was serving as. As bodies began to rain down all over the main avenue of Valentine, there was a point where they would reach the end of the street. And when they did so, Arthur would take the injured Strauss, place him on the back of John's horse, and he will then stay back, ensuring that no one followed Dutch, John, or himself back to the camp of Horseshoe Overlook. The incredible amount of death, violence, and bodies that now decorated the landscape of Valentine would, in fact, maybe the foolish move Agent Milton hoped the gang would make, giving up their presence to anyone in the area that has been hunting them down. How it all happened, though, should have served as a sign that many of their actions in the last few months have become so big, so infamous, that laying low really meant doing as little as possible, even if these actions were completely off in separate states or far away from where the camp was actually located at. Train robberies, gang rescue missions, or anything else that may even remotely betray information to those hunting them on where they are or might have gone off to is a luxury they can't afford. The physical descriptions and MOs are all known after all. Following the Valentine massacre, the gang would immediately pack up and relocate their camp further south, where they would cleverly do something even they never saw coming, helping out the local law enforcement. Granted, it was a cunning scheme from the start, but a move brand new all the same. And we'll cover the further complexity of Arthur that blossoms in the chapters of Clemens Point and Saint-Denis in the next video. Episode 2, of course, but I want to end this off by thanking War Thunder for sponsoring this video again. The links to capitalize on those exclusive rewards and bonus are down in the description and pinned comment. Finally, I want to share a conversation between Mary Beth and Arthur made during Horseshoe Overlook that both highlights Arthur's awareness of the gang's current predicament, as well as his own deep level of self-awareness that permeates throughout this entire chapter.
You okay, Arthur?
I guess.
You seem kind of worried.
Of course I'm worried.
What about?
The whole world's changing. Even I see that now. Our time is pretty much past. They don't want folk like us no more. This there rules will be damned with you. No more outlaws. No more killers. Now it's us being hunted. Oh, they ain't stopping. We went and made our choices a long time ago, so I guess we gotta pay for our sins.
Oh, Arthur. What a sad world we live in.
Oh, I ain't sad, Mary Beth. I'm realistic about what's coming. But I keep killing animals needlessly, and I don't know.
Arthur. Oh, Arthur. You're the only one of these fools knows just how lost he is.
Ain't that the truth? Ain't that the truth? I've lived a bad life, sister.
We've all lived bad lives, Mr. Morgan. We all sin. But I know you.
You don't know me. I had a son. He passed away. Hardened me, feeling that kind of pain. But I know now that you don't get to live a bad life and have good things happen to you.
Life is full of pain, but there is also love and beauty. Be grateful that for the first time, you see your life clearly.
Sure.
Perhaps you could help somebody. Helping makes you really happy.
The Red Dead Redemption games are not just stories about outlaws and shootouts on the frontier. There are eulogies, elegies for a world in its final breath. A world where the dream of freedom was already dying, crushed beneath the boots of civilization, railroads, and the ever-growing strength of the federal government. It's a requiem for the Wild West itself, where the myth of wide-open freedom collapsed with the hard reality that progress has no patience for men like Arthur Morgan or John Marston. At their heart, these games circle around one single question. Can a person outrun their past, or does it follow them until it swallows them whole and drags the closest people to them along with them? Every gunfight, every betrayal, every desperate plan is just another attempt to answer that very question. And every answer is only paid for in blood. Arthur Morgan begins as little more than a weapon, an enforcer for a crumbling gang, bound to Dutch's vision like an iron chain to his sinking ship. Yet with death closing in, with the gang unraveling around him and time quickly running out, he comes to realize that redemption is not found in gold or in glory, or in the hollow promise of one last score. It lives in the small human moments, in kindness, in choosing to leave behind something good when the world has only ever demanded cruelty. Arthur's story is not the triumph of a hero, it is a reckoning. An intimate, brutal journey of a man learning far too late what kind of person he could have been and what kind of mark he will leave behind. John Marston, many years later, becomes the other half of that very same tale, where Arthur's redemption is internal, John's is external, lived out in blood and sacrifice. He wants nothing more than to bury the outlawed life, to build a quiet world for Abigail and Jack on a patch of honest soil. But redemption is not brought with silence. The government drags him back into the bloodshed he tried so hard to escape. And when his debts finally come due, they're paid off in his own blood. John's story proves that freedom in this world is never given. It's only ever taken. And when it is taken, it lasts only for a moment, but at the highest cost. And then standing on the other side of the spectrum is men like Dutch van der Linde and Micah Bell. Two specters of what men can become when they cannot or absolutely just refuse to change. Dutch, once a visionary, becomes a man who mistakes delusion for hope, leading those who trust him into ruin while refusing to admit the dream has already been long dead. Micah, by contrast, never pretends. He is greed and self-interest given flesh, a reminder that some men have no interest in redemption at all. Together, they are the shadows that fall across Arthur and John's path, showing the two fates that await anyone who cannot find the courage to just step away. The truth of Red Dead Redemption is harsh. The frontier did not end in glory, nor in the romantic blaze of gunfights and freedom. It ended in betrayal, in sacrifice, and in quiet tragedies that history would soon bury. Yet through Arthur, through John, the games whisper one final message. Redemption isn't survival. Redemption is legacy. It is what you leave behind in the hearts of others when the dust settles and the world moves on without you. And that brings us to the question at the heart of today's video. The question that lingers long after the credits roll. Did Arthur Morgan truly redeem himself? Or, by the time he saw the light, was it really already too late?
You'd be dead already. But if you continue to irritate me, I'll kill you. I make my apologies to the lady. It's your call.
Oh, I didn't mean nothing.
Apology accepted.
Now, for sanity's sake, we need to strip away one distraction right at the start. I'm not going to factor in player agency here. If you choose to take Arthur on a rampage across the map, slaughtering towns, piling up bounties, and painting the whole countryside red, that's not Arthur as he was written. That's you. And while the freedom to wreak havoc is part of what makes these games so great, it doesn't hold weight in a serious discussion about Arthur actually redeeming himself or not. What matters here is the Arthur that exists in the story itself. The Arthur who lived long before the player ever stepped into his boots. And that man's life was already steeped in bloodshed. Arthur's identity was forged in violence. Long before the opening desperate retreat into Coulter, he had spent decades as an outlaw, killing, stealing, and enforcing Dutch's vision of a life beyond the reach of law and civilization. This wasn't just a regular job, it was far from occasional. He didn't drift in and out of the gang like Trelawney, indulging in it only when convenient. On the contrary, it was the foundation of who Arthur was. It was all of him. Violence was his trade, loyalty to Dutch was his creed. And for years, those two truths were enough to define him. But what makes him even more unique is that he was far from just another recruit. He was arguably the first real prodigy of Dutch and Hosea, taken in after his father's death and molded into something much greater than himself, or perhaps smaller, depending on how you look at it. Now, if Miss Grimshaw was there earlier, she served as the Iron Matriarch, but Arthur was the boy who grew into the gang's backbone. And the order of the gang's foundation mattered because Dutch, Hosea, and then Arthur, together the three of them formed the spine of the infamous Vanderlyn gang. Everything that came after was shaped all around the three of them. Arthur would be the first proof that Dutch's ideas could in fact work. That an orphan boy hardened by loss and delinquency could be remade into something more than just another mindless criminal. He became someone who believed, who was loyal to something larger than himself. Dutch's vision of being nobler, freer, and bonded by love rather than greed would come to actually live inside of Arthur. Dutch didn't want an army of faceless gunmen. He wanted believers, and Arthur was the example. Dutch and Hosea didn't just give him orders, they gave him compassion. They taught him how to read, how to write, how to carry himself, and as the gang grew, Dutch's speeches quite literally became gospel because men like Arthur would come to embody them. Members, as time went on, didn't stay because of obligation or fear, they would come to stay because they believed there was no better alternative.
Sure, I could fall in with another gang, but Dutch. You know, Dutch is different.
Oh, yes. Dutch is certainly different.
And yet there's a part of Arthur that often gets overlooked in all of this. That even Hosea, the closest thing he had to a father, and even openly admitted that he loved and respected more than Dutch, sometimes referred to Arthur as someone who didn't think, calling Arthur a brute, a big mean outlaw who relied on muscle over mind. Now, of course, by the end of the game, we know that couldn't be further from the truth. I mean, as early as Coulter, Arthur's journaling.
It's been a bad few weeks. But Dutch being Dutch, he is busy making plans, and Dutch being Dutch, those plans involve robbery and dreams.
Sketching, reflecting, recording history, illustrating the world around him with a curiosity that goes far beyond the role of just a regular hired gunman. So, why did people see him as the blunt edge of Dutch's dream then? Why was he so often treated as little more than muscle? I think it was because Arthur filled a role that was necessary. Dutch wanted to be seen as the level-headed savior, the man who offered compassion, reason, and an alternative to the ruthlessness of other outlaws. But no leader like that can actually survive without a shadow at his side, someone to enforce the consequences when kindness just wasn't enough. Arthur became that shadow, the blunt edge, the man whose presence made Dutch's ideals credible, because everyone understood there would be real consequences for betrayal, or thinking you can get away with attacking the Vanderlyn gang. And to be fair, I think that role was part of just who Arthur actually was. His faith in Dutch was so absolute that compassion and perception were things he was willing to disregard if it meant protecting the gang. His curiosity wasn't stupidity, it was quite literally ferocious loyalty. Hosea, I think, always knew this. He didn't see Arthur as dumb or reckless, but rather as someone willing to wear that mask if it meant the gang would survive or get something they needed or wanted. Apart from other members utilizing Arthur's rough exterior as being a blockhead and way to dumb things down, in the Spines of America mission he does so again to alleviate Seamus's concerns about working with the Vanderlyn gang, and then once more in selling the Braithwaite moonshine in the town of Rhodes. Only during that example, he perfectly has him play the part even more by pretending to be dumb and mute. The latter of which is less about Arthur being called dumb and not capable of thinking, and more about doing whatever is necessary for the gang's sake, even if it means acting and quite literally playing up a role, despite him hating doing that very same thing. And hence his rough exterior was in fact something Dutch and Hosea both relied upon. However, his appearance and how he carried himself and the ferocity he held behind his actions in securing the gang's interest wasn't just created out of Dutch and Hosea's needs, but rather his personal losses as well. Apart from Arthur's father dying when he was quite young, leaving him to fend for himself, it's what he would lose much later in life that'll really tighten his grip on those closest to him. That was the death of his own son, Isaac, and Isaac's mother, Eliza.
I had a son once, years ago. Don't talk about him much.
Oh, what was his name?
Isaac. His mother, Eliza, the waitress I met. When she got pregnant, she knew who I was, what my life was. I didn't want to promise nothing I couldn't keep, but I said I'd do right by them. Every few months, I'd stop by there for a few days. He was such a good kid. She was too, I guess. Just a kid, 19.
What happened?
I got there one day and saw 2 crosses outside. I knew right away. Turned out some bastards had come through. Robbed him and shot him dead. And offered $10. Hardened me. Feeling that kind of pain.
It's unfortunate he never elaborates on Eliza and Isaac, but perhaps that's all we need. His lack of willingness to dive deeper and further explain his relationship with both Eliza and Isaac comes at a time when he's forced to face his own mortality, to sit and reflect on the life he had chosen to live up until that point, where all of his past actions, regretful, hateful, cruel, happy, all ran through the filter of intense examination that people tend to go through when they're at the end of the rope. The fact he can even admit their deaths hardened him is a far cry from the person he was just hours before, during the times of Coulter all the way to Clemens Point. Arthur couldn't even question his own loyalty to Dutch, unable or even unwilling to face the truth that he was leading them all to ruin. And so how could he be expected to deeply reflect and confront his own evolution that's attributed to such a devastating event? It could also be the origins of why he always referred to John as being the luckiest man alive, because John had a wife and a son that was within the gang. Not to say Arthur was after someone that was within the same life as he was, but the fact that Abigail was inside the Vanderlyn gang of course only made the overall situation much easier for John, rather than being placed in the same exact position as Arthur was with Mary Linton, for example, who absolutely hated this lifestyle. But it's with all these missing pieces that you don't properly see the entire picture of who Arthur is moving into the beginning of the game. Understanding all of this comes along with multiple playthroughs. And so it was with all of this that the Vanderlyn gang wasn't just a group of outlaws to Arthur, obviously, but in fact all he had left. Dutch and Hosea gave him belonging from the earliest age when his blood ties were long gone, and that belonging would eventually become sacred when Isaac and Eliza were killed. Every robbery, every killing, every story he told himself about the gang being different from the rest, it all came from the hunger to protect the only family he truly had left. And that's the complicated tragedy. Arthur wasn't simply a blunt instrument or even just a loyal blind believer. He was someone who had already suffered so much loss, who clung to the gang because losing it meant losing everything. That's why he fought so fiercely, why he defended Dutch so absolutely. To Arthur, the gang wasn't an organization or a choice, it was his life. We see this worldview bleed into his actions at Horseshoe Overlook and even Clemens Point. When he threatens Jimmy Brooks, the honorable ending of saving Jimmy Brooks' life, he still threatens him.
But I'm not a good man, Jimmy Brooks. Not usually. You see, I was in Blackwater. I killed people. And maybe I should have killed you. Should I have killed you, Jimmy Brooks?
Because the bottom line is, Arthur cannot afford, the whole gang cannot afford, for anybody to recognize any of them from Blackwater here in Valentine. Certainly not for that to circle back around to any type of law enforcement, let alone the Pinkertons, and crack down on them, which was a giant threat they barely escaped from. When he pressures Thomas Downs into the unthinkable of selling his wife to pay the gang off, I think that very much highlights the portion of Arthur where the gang of course comes above all else. There might be a little more projection involved in that as well, considering he absolutely hates this line of work. But the bottom line is, you took money from us, we need that money back. Do what you need to do to pay us back.
Where's our money?
I don't have it.
Sell your place.
We already owe more than it's worth.
Then sell your wife, or your family, or something. We ain't your idea of charity.
Even Dutch looks down upon debtors, so there is no salvation for you. But I wanted to point that out because the indifference and often cited cruelty towards Thomas Downs, I don't think are acts of Arthur being a sadist or just enjoying this for the fact that he's enjoying beating the hell out of someone. I think this is more of an act of someone who has learned the hard way that survival always comes first. And there is a cruelness and a ruthlessness attached to that. And another extension of that idea comes when Arthur sends away the German family without any type of sympathy. This of course happens when moving at the camp of Horseshoe Overlook to Clemens Point.
Now go on, get out of here. Go, we need the land, go. Get the hell out of
They
here.
took off Ozza.
Who did?
Men last night.
Where did they take him?
Ain't no business of ours. I don't even speak their language.
You ain't as tough and dense as all that.
In many videos in the past, I've always highlighted this because it's interesting for a number of ways. Yet again, it's Arthur choosing survival over anything else first. He straight up sends them away, citing that they have no ability to help anybody else, considering they can't even help themselves. They're wanted and they're constantly being cracked down by the Pinkertons, their own mistakes, and now the aggressive funding and personal hatred of Leviticus Cornwall. They're ultimately screwed. So helping people, which was once a defining trait of the Vanderlyn gang, is now seen as a form of luxury, one that they simply cannot afford and has to be replaced with pure pragmatism. What can they realistically do? Does this excuse Arthur's carelessness in sending away a frightened mother and her 2 children simply because the gang wanted their land? No. But it does give us a better understanding of the state Arthur was in from culture through the middle of Clemens Point. Like much of the gang, he was locked in self-preservation mode. And in that mode, his historical position as Dutch and Hosea's brutal enforcer in securing loyalty and unity, as well as the necessary day-to-day items and money to keep them all alive and ahead of the law, is more needed and hence harsher now than ever before. Now, with the foundation of Arthur's position within the Vanderlyn gang and how much exactly Hosea and Dutch pretty much relied on him at this point, there's some other elements we need to consider when viewing Arthur as a whole, prior to his illness. And I think there's 2 points that need to be added here, one of which is his relationship with John. This is extremely important to tackle now because the dynamic between the 2 men would later become the foundation of Arthur's very own redemption. He even says he doesn't care what happens to him as long as John makes it out, and with that achievement he can find some peace knowing he did what he could to make amends with his brother. And then there's the relationship with Mary Linton. While not as decisive as his fall from Dutch's Grace in Beaver Hollow or as urgent as his commitment to Abigail, John, and Jack, Mary still matters for reasons that are subtle and not so subtle, that reveal who Arthur was and who he could have been. Now let's focus on John and Arthur here. It's quite obvious at the start both of them have their own pent-up feelings and resentment towards one another. Considering I already made a video dedicated to the very evolution of their relationship, I don't see the point in repeating every single thing here. If you want that much detail, I recommend checking that video out, as it's quite insightful to the smallest moments that we can see the origins and shift in their relationship along with the circumstances surrounding those moments. But to get to the very bottom of it, it boils down to hurt feelings directed at each other and themselves. Arthur's hurt and resentful over John, not only leaving Abigail and his son Jack behind for a year, but the fact that he turned his back on the gang and his brother Arthur. By the time Red Dead Redemption 2 starts, most of the gang, including Dutch, had already forgiven John, Everybody has seemingly moved on except for Arthur, who still holds on to the gang's intense feeling of loyalty and devotion to Dutch, and citing that as the very reason why he refuses to ease up on John. John, on the other hand, suffers from inadequacy of being a father. He wasn't ready for the role, nor willing to actually face it quite yet. So, under the pressure of fatherhood and doing right by Abigail to marry her, he instead cracked and left. This all gets a little more complicated when you start taking other elements into consideration. That Arthur's son passed away, and him even writing in his journal how he should have married Abigail before she fell so hard for John. I wouldn't go so far as to say he still had those deep or unrealized feelings for Abigail. In that same passage, he even damns Mary, possibly referring to the idea that whatever him and Abigail might have ever had could have ended on mutual terms, with Arthur being much more invested in Mary and Abigail finding something with John. So I wouldn't put it so much on the women involved, more so on the fact that John had something Arthur didn't: a family, a son, a woman who wanted him. Two losses Arthur knew all too well: the pain of rejection, or of reaching halfway only to watch it all collapse. With Eliza, he never had a choice. With Mary, he did, and he chose the gang. When she reappears in Valentine, it's clear the wound never healed. Arthur admits he wasn't good enough, and how her father's contempt for him only deepened that divide. Jamie, misguided as he was, would listen to no one but Arthur, a reminder that Mary still trusted him more than anyone else. Each encounter, even though there's only two of them, would pull him back into a life he wanted but never could actually have, because he was bound to Dutch and the dream of the frontier. By the time we see Mary in Saint-Denis, for the last time she'd plead with them to run away with her, and it's clear Arthur wants to more than anything, but as he says, he can't. Not while the gang is hunted, not while their future depends on him.
Is it too late for us, Arthur?
I can't lie to you. I'm a wanted man, Mary. If anyone close to me, well, they're wanted to, and I can't have you wrapped up in there. But it's coming to an end. This time it really is.
Run away with me, Arthur. Run away right now and don't look back.
I want to. More than anything, I want to. But I've got some people I need to take care of. Once they're free, then I'm free. Then I can disappear.
But Arthur...
If we're gonna run away anywhere, we'd need money. Soon, I'll have some.
I know you won't run away. But it's a pretty dream.
Very pretty. But I will, once I get some money. I had some. But then some fool got it trapped into a town and I can't go back to. That's another story.
I'll write you.
He tries to convince her, or ultimately himself, that he'll be free when the money is safe, when Dutch's dream is secure, when everyone that relies upon him, Dutch and Hosea, are no longer being hunted themselves and are all in a much safer position. And maybe part of that is true. Clemens Point ends with the boldness of the Pinkertons walking into the heart of the Vanderland gang camp. Right as the gang is trying to understand how the entire situation between the Braithwaites and Grays, two families they viewed as backwards, got the upper hand on them. They have no choice but to immediately relocate, going further from Dutch and the gang's ideas of freedom in the West, settling just outside the city of Saint-Denis, a city that embodied everything they hated: cramped, dirty living conditions, a corrupted political scene with the real power running through Angelo Bronte, the very person who's holding Jack. Not to mention Shady Belle getting attacked by the O'Driscolls, Dutch, Arthur, and Lenny being set up at the trolley station by Angelo Bronte, Tilly being kidnapped by the Foreman gang, and Dutch's quest to achieve revenge on Bronte by mounting a full-out assault on his mansion and kidnapping him. Yeah, it's safe to say the gang is far from okay, putting their faith on one big score as a Hail Mary to turn their entire situation around, and we know how detrimental that turns out to be. If you look at the missions of this chapter, much of the main story really highlights the gang's diminishing returns and moves to secure proper funding, within the heart of the very thing they're trying so desperately to escape. With the subtle shift in Arthur and John's relationship, going from being resentful and hostile to Arthur seeing John actually care and beat himself up after Jack's kidnapping. It's also the same time we see John shift on his opinion towards Dutch, blaming Dutch and Hosea for the mistakes that the gang has made in the town of Rhodes, trying so hard to play both families. And it's that dissension that in turn Dutch would end up blaming John for the failure of the Saint Denis bank heist, and considering him as a rat and possibly the one person responsible for the catastrophic failure of that robbery. Had Arthur chosen to hold on to his resentment towards John for his original abandonment, or maybe it was John's intense and genuine remorse over Jack's kidnapping that had overturned Arthur's feelings towards John, winning him over as an instant ally and forming that bedrock of rebuilding the relationship that turned everything around, something that would have undoubtedly altered the course of the game's ending, as John really only had Arthur and Sadie to look towards when needing a genuine ally. After all, it was their own love and trust in John and holding on to Dutch's original vision of everybody being a genuine family that compelled them to disobey Dutch's orders to just let him be. I believe it would be a bit one-sided to not include Arthur having already seen Dutch do things that seemed out of the ordinary, or even speak as if he wasn't himself on the island of Gorma. That, of course, being a significant period of time and events that helped Arthur lean a little more into the understanding of Dutch either not being himself these days, or, in fact, doing the opposite, and after all of these years, finally letting his true colors show. Whether Arthur's loyalty to John can be traced back to one incident, multiple, or just reinforced by subsequent events at Dutch's own hands, seems to be one of those parts of the game that can be debated for quite some time. So I'd love to hear your own thoughts on this, and where you stand. For me, I always leaned on Arthur softening up towards John after Jack's kidnapping, understanding how distraught John genuinely is, and even going to the point of not only beating himself up, but blaming Dutch and Hosea, instead of pushing John to run away or just leave or do anything else that I think would have made a lot more sense for Arthur had it been at the beginning of the game. Arthur instead calms John down, reassures him and tells him that we'll figure it all out, everything will work out just fine. And then all the events after that kind of happen in such a fast enough pace that John is never allowed to move on from blaming Dutch. Instead, Jack's kidnapping is only compounded with more tragedies and increasing the divide between the two camps that continue to grow inside of the Vanderlyn gang. Meanwhile, the side content during this chapter shows an Arthur who, despite continuing to put on his rough exterior, is seen doing kind things for the church, donating money and returning the crucifix to Sister Calderon, while being confronted with the misfortune that fell upon Mrs. Downs with her resorting to prostitution in the wake of her husband's death.
Hey, you want some company, mister?
No.
You sure?
Hey.
What?
I don't know you. This is Downs?
Oh, no. Not you. Get away.
Hi,
Now.
I mean, hey.
Help! Help!
Hold on.
This man is bothering
Now.
me. Someone help me. Officer, help!
Beaver Hollow may be the chapter where Arthur is meant to face his own mortality, but I'd argue it's Saint Denis where the writing is undeniably on the wall, and despite his good deeds, Arthur's image of himself is far from positive, making it clear to Sister Calderon, no matter what, he's not a good man, and she's horribly deceived for thinking otherwise.
I ain't looking for forgiveness. It ain't about that. Don't forgive me. Just take the money and get out of here, please. I know I ruined your life. I suffer for it every day. But don't let yourself get killed for pride. I've seen it kill too many folk.
Arthur's diagnosis doesn't pop up in a vacuum. For those keenly aware and paying close attention to the arrival and worsening of his cough, they notice it at various points throughout the story, with a bombshell coming at a time where our attention is already drawn in so many different directions. Jose and Lenny have just been killed. At least that's the reality of the situation that we are returning to from being marooned. But these two deaths in particular are extremely important because they're two people Arthur trusted most, and he isn't even granted the dignity of a proper burial or a final goodbye. For Hosea especially, the loss is staggering. He'd been the gang's conscience, the logical counterweight to Dutch's growing madness, and without him, Arthur falls into the role that seems to inherit that responsibility, especially with Dutch acting in ways Arthur had never seen before. In many ways, Arthur becomes Hosea's spiritual successor, the voice of reason pushing against Dutch's spiral as the gang staggers toward Beaver Hollow. But grief is only one of many wounds. The gang has just barely survived being lost at sea, marooned on the island of Gorma, where dehydration, hunger, relentless tropical heat, and ceaseless fighting stripped them of what little strength they had left. It was a time period that would do irreparable damage damage to Arthur's physical health, and then returning to the United States brought no relief, only a Pinkerton assault on their refuge at LeKay Lake, forcing them to flee once more. By this time, Arthur's body is battered, his mind exhausted, and his spirit worn extremely thin. There's been no rest, no chance to recover, only a constant press forward into ever-increasing chaos. And layered on top of all of this is the growing fracture within the gang itself. Rumors spread that John is being hanged by the government for his crimes as part of the Vanderlyn gang. Dutch, meanwhile, shows little interest in saving him, clinging to the belief that John was the one responsible for the disastrous Saint-Denis robbery, something that can be seen as the very death sentence he left John to face in Sisika Penitentiary. Because if John was seen as responsible for the bank's failed heist, then John would likewise be held responsible for the deaths of Lenny, Hosea, and the shattering of Dutch's plans for the final big score in the Virgin Lands in the West. When framed like this, it becomes even more interesting that Dutch is really the only person visibly against the idea of saving John, giving insight to the fact that that was probably a well-guarded secret that was firmly believed within Dutch's own head. Because apart from Arthur, it doesn't seem like Dutch ever openly admits that he believed John was the traitor or the rat or the one responsible for the failed Saint-Denis bank robbery. Instead, publicly, especially when in the presence of Abigail, it was all about giving him time, give him space, give him the opportunity to think, plan, and ultimately execute the proper prison break. And when given that space, hoping that it takes just enough time for John to ultimately be executed, saving face and allowing him to essentially place all the blame on a dead man. When you frame it like that, it's even more interesting that Dutch was the only person that was so passionately against saving John, and how he was so angry that Arthur would go behind his back and save John. It also portrays why Dutch was so furious over Arthur's disobedience. Arthur's actions forced him into an uncomfortable corner, having to explain his own inaction, not just to John directly, but to the entire gang. It became a fair question to ask. If Dutch truly saw John as his son, why was he hesitating while the same son's life hung by a thread? Especially when the breakout only required 2 people to succeed. You could argue that rescuing John was too bold, that it might draw more attention to them. But that defense falls apart when you take into account Dutch's own reckless choices, using the Wapiti tribe as a smokescreen against the United States Army, executing Leviticus Cornwall in broad daylight, actions that brought far more danger on the gang than Arthur ever did, and instead served the purpose of being another notch in Dutch's reasoning to distance himself from Arthur, and to lean even heavier on Micah, the ultimate yes man, someone who instead of challenging him, of trying to bring some form of reason to the table, does nothing but endorse and accelerate Dutch's worsening qualities. Regardless, for Arthur, it's another splinter of doubt in a man he had once trusted absolutely. John's life hangs in the balance, Dutch refuses to care, and Arthur finds himself pulled into 2 directions. Toward the Dutch who raised him and seemingly is becoming less and less like himself, which can also demand another form of fanatical loyalty, as when people are spiraling out of control and they don't seem like themselves, it almost feels immoral and wrong to abandon people when they so desperately need a firm reality check. Within this is the reality that he needs to save John as well. This is a storm in which Arthur receives his diagnosis, not just a death sentence but a mirror. While continuing to press forward and assume the role of the glue that binds the gang, Arthur is forced, finally, to stop. For the first time, he has to put his own health before everyone else's well-being. What's often overlooked when people talk about his sickness and how everything shifts isn't just that he's dying, it's how he's dying. This isn't just another gunshot wound that heals with time or willpower or even just a little bit of proper rest. Tuberculosis eats away at him. It demands rest he'll never get. It's also well past the point of him being able to make sure that proper arrangements are made. I'm not even talking about his death or his burial or how he can make amends with people who he negatively affected during the heights of his health. More so just the people that are directly involved around him, such as John, Abigail, Charles, and Sadie. When Arthur learns he's sick, death isn't coming, it's really already there, sitting beside him, waiting for its moment. And I don't want to cheapen that by saying something naive like some of us can relate, because tuberculosis in the 1800s wasn't something you just walked away from. It was slow, cruel, and inevitable. And as Micah showed us all too well, some people took advantage of people's declining health. But to understand what it's like to be in Arthur's shoes, think of the worst illness you've ever had. The kind that leaves you bedridden, exhausted, in the mind state where you want to get things done, but your body just refuses. Now imagine that same feeling while being hunted by the law, while the Pinkertons tighten their grip, while Dutch loses his mind, and the United States Army closes in because of his reckless war with the Wapiti tribe. You have no steady place to rest, every plan is falling apart, every belief you ever held is crumbling, the people you trusted are splitting away. And the worst part, the things you did in the name of survival, like Strauss's money-lending missions, are now coming back around. If you kept enforcing those debts all the way to Beaver Hollow, the fallout is still unfolding right in front of Arthur. The sickness he carries isn't just in his lungs, it's in the guilt of what he's done. The families he's ruined, the lives he's broken, and he can't escape any of it anymore. Every cough reminds him of the epic fall from grace, and every act of kindness that follows feels less like redemption and more like some form of repentance, adding to his own self-image of not being a good man. Beaver Hollow, beyond the gang's collapse, is framed entirely around people and moments that forced Arthur to confront who he's become. Every action in this chapter either reinforces that repentant side of him, rekindles a brotherhood he once took for granted, or drives him to help simply because it's the right thing to do. As an example, his involvement with the Wapiti tribe begins, as many of his choices do, out of obligation. At first, it's loyalty to Dutch, to the gang, to the idea that they still stood for something and that Arthur needs help as adopted father turned leader, gets some grasp of reality, to stop sliding down this descent of madness and making their situation go from bad to worse. A move that both he and Charles immediately grasp upon when seeing Dutch's eagerness to get involved with the Wapiti tribe. Slowly, as his energy wanes and things only continue to look gloomier, that duty transforms into something deeply personal. His bond with Charles plays a major role in that shift. Charles saved Arthur's life, and in turn, Arthur honors that by standing beside him when the tribe needs help. Through Charles, he begins to find purpose again, not in robbing or running, but in protecting people who still have something worth protecting. Arthur's empathy for Rains Fall and the Wapiti people also grows out of guilt. Rains Fall is a man of peace, only asking that the government uphold the agreement his tribe was promised. A simple request that's continuously betrayed by both sides. Watching the chief's calm dignity clash with his son Eagle Flies' rage mirrors Arthur's own conflict between restraint and violence. What makes it worse is knowing that Dutch is feeding that fire, using the Wapiti's struggle as a smokescreen for his own war with the law. It's one of Arthur's clearest moments, realizing that while the Wapitis are fighting for survival, Dutch is just fighting to protect his own ego, or protect himself, as that may have always been the case. With Sadie, it's different. Her bond with Arthur isn't born out of obligation like Charles, but it's just as meaningful. When most of the remaining gang began keeping their distance, seeing Arthur and John as outsiders, Sadie became a little bit of an outcast herself. She still had rage within her, the same recklessness that only continues to find Dutch more and more every single day, but hers came from pain, not pride. Despite the gang's current predicament and there being a clear shift within Dutch's own mentality and priorities, Sadie still held on to what Dutch originally preached. They were still family, and that meant looking out for one another. Sadie proved herself again and again, helping rescue John, later Abigail, and becoming one of the few people Arthur could still trust enough to speak to honestly. Her request for Arthur's help in taking down the last of the O'Driscolls, the man responsible for her husband's death, isn't just a vengeance mission. Earlier in the story, it might have seemed like a distraction, one that would have been poorly advised, especially from Arthur. Here, on the other hand, it feels earned. It becomes a noble trade-off. She agrees to help Arthur with Abigail, Jack, and John, and in exchange, he helps put her ghosts to rest. Now, depending on your honor level, even the way Arthur frames this deal changes. One version through duty.
I'll tell you what, I'll do it, but there's something you could help me with.
Sure.
You, me, and John. This whole thing is pretty much done, but Dutch still has our money hidden away, so...
Well, how do you mean?
When the time comes, just be ready.
What do you mean?
I mean, if we can get out of here with money, you and me, we're more ghosts than people. And none of that loyalty matters.
Jesus. Okay, I'm with you.
Well, then you got yourself a gun. What's left of one?
The other through compassion.
I'll tell you what, I'll do it, but there's something you could help me with. Abigail, Jack, John, make sure they make it. I mean, this whole thing is pretty much done. But when the time comes...
How do you mean?
When the time comes, you help them.
What do you mean?
I mean it. Help them escape. When I... You know, you and me, we're more ghosts than people. But them, they could...
I know. Of course I will. Thank you, Arthur.
Either way, it seals a mutual loyalty between the two of them. When the dust settles and Sadie finally unleashes her fury on their O'Driscolls, you can almost feel Arthur's silence beside her. A moment of shared release between the two who have lost everything and still find a reason to keep fighting. And then there's John. John is a unique case, not just because of his rocky history with Arthur, but because of his own uncertainty about Dutch and the gang's future. Early on, his anger toward Dutch and Hosea, accusing them of leading the gang from bad to worse, was never a genuine rebellion, despite how Dutch perceived it. It was instead John's own personal pain and guilt. It was words of someone trying to make sense of his own failures as a father and as a husband. That guilt becomes clearer in his private talks with Arthur near the end. Both of them share the same doubts, questioning who they are, what they believed in throughout all of these years, and whether Dutch's collapse is new or if it was always there and they just missed it, buried underneath his charm and big promises. They begin to see that maybe Dutch hasn't changed at all. Maybe they were just too loyal, too blind to notice who he truly was. And it's here that Arthur gives John the push he never had before, the blessing, the permission to walk away from the entire gang. Arthur's dying conviction that John's future, Abigail, Jack, the quiet life he still has a chance to build, is far more important than any misplaced loyalty or dream of freedom that only continues to appear as just that, a dream. It's Arthur's final lesson, the one he learned too late, that survival means nothing if you lose yourself along the way. He doubles down on that conviction during A Bridge to Nowhere, and in his final private conversation with John before the train robbery meant to hit the United States Army's payroll.
Are Abigail and Jack ready to leave?
I think so.
Okay. Well, whatever happens with this job today, wherever Dutch and them go next, we're getting you the hell out of here. We're going to get you the money you need. Knowing the three of you got out, well, maybe all of this will still mean something. Tilly and Susan, too. I'll do whatever it takes.
You've always had my back, Arthur.
Perhaps not always.
Arthur acknowledges his past failures and admits that he didn't always have John's back. But now, when it matters most, there is no confusion anymore. John, Abigail, Jack, and a few women still with the gang have become his only concern. In these final days, he circles back to what he essentially has always been, the protector. Not of Dutch's dream, nor in the name of the gang, but of the people who still have a chance to live beyond it. These three, John, Abigail, and Jack, are the clearest reflections of Arthur's redemption arc. Yes, he does help Charles, the Wapedis, and Sadie, as we outlined, but with these three, it provides so much more. A fresh start, a family, a possible lineage, and heritage. No matter your honor level or choices, their survival defines the end of Arthur's story. But to only focus on them would be to miss the other pieces of his atonement scattered across the world. One of the most telling examples is the widow of Arthur, Londonderry. He worked himself to death trying to repay a debt to Strauss. The same type of debt Arthur once enforced without thinking twice, despite him hating the work. When Arthur discovers Londonderry's widow and son threatened with eviction after already losing their husband and father, it hits him harder than seemingly anything else at the time. That mission is his final collection, and it becomes his breaking point. You can choose to absolve the debts or absolve the debts and provide money, but the real impact is in Arthur's silence, his expression, the weight in his voice. You can feel the shame, the realization that every ledger entry, every coin collected came at the cost of someone's life, and that trickled down, making that effect so much more detrimental if they had a family or people depending on them.
I just wanted to say the debt's canceled and here, take this. It won't bring your husband back, I know. You need money and I don't.
Well, you're a good man. I just wish you'd done it before he worked himself into the grave.
But you know, maybe you and your friend that lent him the money could do things differently. Like, not threaten a man. Excuse me.
I'm sorry, ma'am. I really am.
When Arthur confronts Strauss after visiting the Londonderry family, it isn't an act of rebellion or even redemption. It's exhaustion. He can't stomach Strauss anymore, the man, his work, or the reflection of himself in all of it. All the years of shaking down the desperate, pretending it was just business, pretending it was for the gang. It's over now. Throwing Strauss out isn't about making peace or finding moral closure. It's the act of someone who's sick, physically, morally, spiritually, finally drawing a line he should have drawn a long time ago. It's about the simple refusal to keep being what Dutch and Strauss turned him into. Finally, he rejected the very work that got him sick, the same work that he has abhorred his entire life. It's by then no coincidence that, around the same time, Arthur crosses paths with the widow of Thomas Downs, the sickly man he once beat nearly to death over an unpaid debt. What he finds is devastating. The family that had once lived peacefully on their small ranch is completely gone. Edith has been forced into prostitution, and their son Archie now works in the mines, a boy breaking himself to spare his mother from further humiliation. Their world has completely collapsed, and their hatred toward Arthur is justified. They blame him for everything, for Thomas's death, for their ruin, and for the chain of misery that followed them ever since. Yet despite their resentment, despite being told they don't want his help or even his money, Arthur can't walk away. He intervenes anyways, saving Archie from the miners who torment him, then tracking down Edith in the woods and saving her from one of her dates. He even tells the both of them it's not forgiveness that he's looking for, so if that's the case, why help? And if he admits to Sister Calderon that he is afraid of death and what comes into play after his passing, while also admitting that he is a bad man and isn't exactly looking for that redemption, then why continue to help? Specifically with the Downs family, I think it's due to responsibility. He's forced to face his own mortality, dying slowly and in the most karmic way imaginable. The sickness isn't just killing him, it's stripping him down, forcing him to confront everything he's done. Arthur has always known the difference between right and wrong, between what's acceptable and what's downright deplorable. But survival has a way of bending those lines. When you're living on the run, exceptions can be made, must be made, like when he drove away the German family back in the closing chapter of Horseshoe Overlook. It wasn't cruelty, it was pragmatism, or that's what he told himself. But now as his life burns out and the gang teeters on the edge of collapse, none of that matters anymore. The excuses, the loyalty, the justifications, they all fall away. What's left is a shell of his former self trying to make the smallest difference with the little time he has left. So why not help someone who can still be saved? Why not try to protect the few decent people left in a world that's only ever rewarded indecency? All the better when it's the people that essentially haunts every breath he takes now. He gives them every dollar he has left, insisting they take it, and leaves them with a single message.
Here, take this. I don't need it no more.
I don't want your money.
Yeah, I know you don't want it.
I don't.
You sure as shit need it. Take it. No. I ain't looking for forgiveness. It ain't about that. Don't forgive me. Just take the money and get out of here, please. I know I ruined your life. I suffer for it every day. But don't let yourself get killed for pride. I seen it kill too many folk. Don't say anything. Don't thank me. Just take the money and pack your bags. That's all I gotta say.
Thank you, Mr. Morgan.
I said don't thank me. Get out of here. Please.
When Arthur says, I said don't thank me, it carries more meaning than it seems. It's not false modesty, it's resignation. He doesn't want gratitude or forgiveness because deep down he believes he doesn't deserve either of it. Not after everything he's done. John tells him he had his back. Sister Calderon calls him a good man and reminds him that helping others brings him peace. Genuine happiness, as she tells him his face is always lit up and he's always helping someone when she's around. But Arthur doesn't believe any of them. He's too far gone in his own eyes. His good deeds can't undo what he's done, not for others and not for himself. The regrets he carries now isn't something time can heal, especially when he knows he's out of that. But then there's Charlotte. Unlike the Londonderrys or the Downs family, her story isn't defined by debts or tragedy chasing her down, at least not in a way that reflects Arthur's per se. Arthur's place in her life comes from something far simpler and a little purer: kindness. For those of you that may have never ran into Charlotte, she's essentially a widow who is found crying at the gravesites of her husband that was just mauled by a bear. The two of them are city folk that bought into the romantic idea of being able to just live off on the land, within realizing in the most tragic way possible that it's much easier said than done for them. Charlotte, by her own admission, doesn't know how to hunt, how to scavenge for edible plants, or even how to use a hunting rifle, or a rifle in general for self-defense. She's vulnerable, and practically doomed to die out here in the wilderness. So Arthur decides to teach her. He shows her how to hunt, skin rabbits, and use her late husband's rifle to survive alone in the wilderness. For Charlotte, his lessons give her strength, a reason to believe she can make it on her own after all this time, after having the worst reality check swoop out her legs right from underneath her. For Arthur, on the other hand, it's something a little different. It feels like peace. There's no guilt to confront, there's no redemption to chase, it's just quiet purpose. A chance to help someone without the burden of his past pressing down on him, or at least, that's how it feels until your second encounter with her. After taking some time to teach her how to use her rifle, she invites Arthur inside for a meal, to eat the rest of the rabbit that he helped her catch the last time they saw each other. And in the middle of them having this peaceful meal, and Charlotte begins to talk more about her backstory and her own family, her upbringing, and how she got into this mess out here in the wilderness, Arthur begins to have an episode.
Here, and I got crushed by this. You know, I pictured myself picking fresh vegetables, sipping homemade wine, writing a great novel. But I turned out to be a far more pathetic anti-heroine than any I could ever pen.
Oh, well. I reckon you're gonna be just fine.
Are you all right? Can I get you some water?
No, I'm fine. I just, yeah, thank you for this. I think it's best if I make...
Stay right there. It's gonna be okay.
It's one of the worst episodes he has, eventually blacking out on the floor of her cabin. It's an extremely sad moment because it emphasizes his health has deteriorated so much he can't even sit down to enjoy a meal without coughing to the point of losing consciousness. Moments in life that are meant to just be quiet, beautiful exchanges between two strangers become that looming shadow, a reminder that one day he just won't wake up. And the people around him, the small moments of kindness and genuine help with them outside of the gang, and the very few small number of people I've already mentioned, are the ultimate extent of Arthur's atonement.
I gave you all I had. I did. John made it. He's the only one. The rest of us... I tried. In the end, I did.
For Arthur, redemption was never something everyone would fully agree upon. And that's fine. That's the beauty of these games, and of Arthur's complexity as a character. Some believe he redeemed himself by turning the misfortune of others around, by staying true to those who remained loyal even as everything fell apart. Others argue that doesn't erase who he was, a ruthless outlaw who only tried to do good once death was certain and the dream had already long been dead. That question alone makes his story so human. Does redemption still count if it only comes after the writing's on the wall? When doing the right thing starts to look less like virtue and more like a plea for forgiveness? If you only change because you know you're out of time, is that redemption or is it fear? Maybe the truth lies somewhere in between. Arthur didn't suddenly become a saint, he simply stopped lying to himself. He stayed loyal not to Dutch but to John, the one person who still mattered most to him. Because at any point, Arthur did have the ability to still just think of himself, turn around and run. The option to meet up with Mary Linton and rekindle that long-lost love still was on the table until he received that devastating letter with his ring returned. But instead, Arthur prioritized John and his family escaping. Because of Arthur, John found the courage to build something better, even proposing to Abigail with Arthur's own ring. It's poetic, really. The ring that once symbolized Arthur's lost love with Mary Linton becoming the emblem of John's new beginning. In that way, Arthur didn't just die for John, he lived on through him. And while some claim John's eventual death invalidates Arthur's sacrifice, I kind of would argue the opposite. That ending says more about John than it does for Arthur. John's downfall came from his inability to let go, to walk away from Dutch and Micah, and from vengeance. From the life Arthur begged him to just escape and forget about. So when John finally kills Micah, is it justice for Arthur, or the final proof that neither man could ever fully outrun who they were? And what eventually happens to John is the repercussions of him going back after Micah. Whatever your stance, there's little doubt that much of the story, such as in life, is riddled with what-ifs and other possibilities. So much is left on the table, with so many people wishing or wanting things have transpired differently, leaving us all acknowledging, though, at least the superior writing within this game and its many talented actors. But I leave the ultimate question up to you. Did Arthur really manage to redeem himself or not? And how much of this is really filtered through player bias? We have to acknowledge there's a deep sense of sympathy and compassion for Arthur, which is only fair as we spend countless of hours in his shoes, feeling his pain, empathy, cheering along for his victories, and weeping silently in his losses.
My dear Arthur, you never showed up. And now, after looking at the newspapers, I understand why. I don't imagine you'll receive this letter, but I nonetheless must send it. Arthur. Oh, Arthur. I was just starting to dream the silliest and softest of dreams. I miss you, and I will always miss you. But I cannot live like that. And it seems you cannot live any other way. When I'm with you, the world makes sense, but when we are apart, I see clearly that your world is not a world from which one can escape. I'm so sorry for everything. For everything long ago, and for starting up that business again. There's a good man within you, Arthur, but he is wrestling with a giant. And the giant wins time and again.